Chapter 641. When I was a young pony, Mr. Albus Dumbledore taught magic in the castle. At that time, I was very curious about the wizarding world. I once wandered into the castle, causing some students to panic, and they attacked me. It was Mr. Dumbledore who intervened and sent me back to the tribe. Like Hagrid, he is one of the few humans who treats magical beings as equals, the Centaur Elder said to Atticus Blaine in a friendly tone. Atticus understood why the old centaur mentioned Dumbledore. He nodded towards the elder and smiled apologetically. I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances, Elder, but I believe what I am about to discuss with you must remain strictly confidential. You may call me Horn, Mr. Blaine, said Horn, the centaur elder. After hearing Atticus's words, his cloudy eyes flashed with a faint light. What confusion can I help you with? Atticus glanced around the empty hall, noting the absence of chairs or any deity to be worshipped. Under Horn's watchful gaze, Atticus drew his wand and waved it over the open space. 2 futons, one large and one small, appeared in the dim air. Let's sit and talk, Atticus suggested, gesturing for Horn to join him. He walked over and sat cross-legged on the futon. When Horn also knelt down, Atticus pointed to the murals on the dome. Before we begin our formal conversation, Horn, I would like to know more about these murals. You mentioned that they depict the island of Avalon. Horn regretted his earlier slip of the tongue, but it was too late to retract his words. Yes, Mr. Blaine, he replied. Having lived in the temple for nearly half a century, Horn could recall every detail of the mural on the dome with his eyes closed. He spoke in a somber voice. It's not surprising that you're interested in the island of Avalon. It has become a legend in both wizard and muggle cultures. Humans aren't even sure if it truly exists, but we centaurs know it is real, and our ancestors lived there. Is that so? Atticus asked lightly, not showing the surprise Horn had anticipated. I thought your people migrated to this forest from the island of Avalon after Hogwarts was built. In the myths of wizards and muggles, Avalon appeared thousands of years ago. So Horn, why did you move here? Why didn't your ancestors continue to live there? I'm sorry, Mr. Blaine, Horn said after a moment of silence, shaking his head. The centaurs have lost records of those histories. For over 1,000 years, this forest has not always been peaceful. We've experienced many wars, and many records were lost in the flames of conflict. Atticus, sensing the untruth in Horn's words, chose not to expose the lie. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, over thousands of years, much historical truth has been lost to time. So what else do you know about this mythical island? Very little, Mr. Blaine, Horn admitted, relieved that Atticus didn't press for more details. I only know that Avalon Island was a paradise. When it existed in this world, many lives thrived there. There were no racial distinctions, no wars or discrimination, no hunger or exploitation. Magical creatures, humans, and nature lived in harmony, exploring the mysteries of nature together. Even if it was a fabrication, Horn's eyes held a faint longing as he spoke. In today's magical world, magical creatures are often imprisoned, slaughtered, or raised by wizards. Compared to that, the idea of Avalon seemed like a distant dream. If life on Avalon Island is truly as idyllic as described, it's no wonder Horn feels a renewed longing for it. So that's what it is, Atticus Blaine nodded, his face obscured by the shadow of a beam. Horn couldn't discern Blaine's expression, but the young and powerful wizard's next casual words sent a rush of blood through Horn's veins. You still yearn for the days when your ancestors lived on Avalon Island. Is that why you sympathize with the Druids, who are also survivors of Avalon Island, and why you're willing to protect them? The sudden revelation nearly made Horn leap from his seat, yet, as Blaine sat there quietly, a thunderous authority emanated from his slender frame, captivating the centaur. The centaurs and Hogwarts have been neighbors for millennia. I assumed that, given our relationship, the centaurs would inform us of such a significant decision. Blaine's calm tone sent a shiver down Horn's spine. Or do centaurs view all wizards as a greedy and despicable lot, eager to wield their magic for harm? Horn immediately recognized these words as those Blaine had spoken to Loya in the secret realm. How did you know? Horn stammered, fear gripping his heart. He realized that dwelling on this question was futile. The priority was to quell Blaine's anger and safeguard the Druids in the secret realm. They pose no threat, Mr. Blaine. Druid practice centers on the soul. Only those with pure and kind hearts can become druids. They share the centaur's philosophy and live in harmony with nature. What do you think of Vitia Cleona? Blaine interrupted, his tone still calm. What do you make of her actions, lurking in the castle? Horn stared at Atticus Blaine, disbelief etched in his eyes. The old centaur never imagined that the castle administrators were aware of the druid's contemporary sacrifice and that Vitia Cleona had been hiding within their walls. Do you consider Vitia Cleona's actions at the Wizards' Quidditch World Cup final to be benevolent? Blaine's eyes were cold. Horn, tell me, how much do you know about Cleona's purpose for infiltrating the castle? Horn opened his mouth, hesitated, and finally spoke with resignation. Miss Cleona told us she entered the castle for the future of Druidism. She said it was crucial, but couldn't divulge details or it would bring war to the Centaur tribe. When she found you, the war had already reached here, Blaine said coldly. You know nothing of her true intentions. Perhaps the Centaurs merely wish to shelter the homeless Druids, but have you considered that this might bring unnecessary danger to the young wizards in the castle? End of this chapter. Chapter 642, The Origin of Magic Power. In Atticus Blaine's solemn gaze, Horn lowered his head, remaining silent. It wasn't that he hadn't anticipated this. He simply didn't care. Fundamentally, these centaurs believed themselves to be separate from the magical world. They were indifferent to the opinions of wizards and unconcerned about the risks their actions posed to them. Seeing Horn's silence, a hint of helplessness flickered in Atticus's purple eyes. It wasn't that the centaurs were entirely reckless. At least they had chosen a settlement for the druids far beyond the reach of Hogwarts Castle's influence. Even if a conflict arose, it wouldn't affect the castle. The only issue was that the old centaur was unaware of why Vitia Cleona was lurking at Hogwarts, though it knew there were intruders in the castle, and the centaur was a druid. Atticus was frustrated that he had kept this information hidden due to his ties to Avalon Island, without even considering warning Hogwarts. Of course, Cleona's ability to remain undetected at the school, even under Moody's watchful eye, was tacitly approved by both him and Dumbledore. However, there is a difference between being proactive and reactive. Atticus rose from the mat and walked toward the wall in front of the temple. The inner wall was adorned with tanned animal skin armor, engraved with numerous astronomical diagrams. After a brief glance, Atticus lost interest and looked down at his feet. After a moment, he turned his attention to Horn, who appeared nervous. The implication was clear. Horn's old equine face was filled with bitterness, but he eventually stood up silently, joining Atticus and looking at the floor with his front hooves. The sound of floor tiles shifting echoed through the solemn temple, revealing a dark cave entrance before Atticus. You are the first wizard to step into the Centaur Holy Land, Mr. Blaine. I am deeply honored, Atticus replied calmly. He gestured toward the entrance, and a burning torch flew into the hall, accompanying him into the tunnel. The tunnel descended over 100 feet below ground. For centaurs, who were not adept at spellcasting, excavating such a deep space must have been a formidable task. Moreover, the tunnel was remarkably dry, a rarity in the humid, forbidden forest. At this point, Horn could only let events unfold. Even if he signaled the tribesmen outside, it would have no effect and might only provoke Atticus Blaine's wrath, leading to heavy casualties among the centaurs. He followed Blaine into the sacred land that had never been opened before. The bottom of the ramp led to a spacious corridor, ending at a dark wooden door imbued with defensive magic. Unlike wizard incantations, this magic was crafted from various naturally magic-rich materials, combined through ancient techniques passed down by the centaurs. The resulting solution, containing magical properties, was used to carve intricate patterns with ink, possessing extraordinary effectiveness. In essence, the patterns on the door were true magic words, the original expression of magic. Atticus stood before the door, observing the glossy magic text for a while, then suddenly raised his chin toward it and asked, "Do you still have a complete system of true magic texts?" The answer was evident. If the centaurs possessed such knowledge, their young would not be wielding swords and spears. The pattern seemed simple, but when carved, it left traces in multiple dimensions of space. The pattern before them was merely the projection of those traces in the real world. The power of the ancient magic was undeniable. The magical patterns should not be underestimated. Violent dismantling could potentially send the temple above his head soaring into the sky. Therefore, Atticus Blaine stepped aside from the door and glanced at Horn. The old horseman's expression shifted, clearly showing his reluctance. However, at his age, he understood that circumstances often outweigh personal desires. "Please don't damage anything inside," Horn sighed, stepping forward to place his red palm against the door. The wooden door emitted a steely clang, and with a flash of light, the world beyond the door unfolded before Atticus's eyes. The sudden sense of danger made Atticus instinctively close his eyes. After a few seconds, he reopened them, slightly surprised by the scene before him. Behind the door lay a room comparable in size to Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. As the door opened, torches on the walls automatically ignited, casting bright golden flames that illuminated the spacious room. Atticus found himself facing hundreds of stone centaur sculptures. Each sculpture was majestic and lifelike, holding rusty spears or nearly decayed bows. Their expressions varied, some with eyes wide in anger, others charging forward with indomitable spirit, all exuding extraordinary presence. "This is," Atticus began. "Centaurs, unlike wizards, uphold the tradition of being buried deep underground after death. We come from nature, so we should return to nature after death," Horn explained respectfully, gazing at the sculptures. "But to honor them, we take away their weapons and use sculptures to capture their likeness in life. Only heroes receive such treatment. They are all warriors who have helped the tribe overcome difficulties." Atticus nodded slightly. "I understand. This is the Hall of Heroes of the Centaurs." Though Atticus felt no special connection to these centaur heroes, he understood the significance of this place to them. Instead of walking through the centaur sculptures, he respectfully moved along the gap beside the wall, making his way to another door opposite the main hall. This behavior undoubtedly earned Horn's approval of this great magician from the human world. Thus, when they reached the second closed wooden door, Horn took the initiative to open it without waiting for Atticus's signal. The second room also left Atticus somewhat awestruck. It was another vast stone chamber, empty except for the walls, which were covered with large stone slabs, each engraved with a different star chart, exuding an air of mystery. Atticus thought fleetingly of Aurora, who would likely be thrilled to see this. He quickly moved forward, examining the star charts, but suddenly stopped at the back of the room. Atticus's knowledge of astronomy was limited to common sense, so he wasn't particularly interested in these star charts. However, as he looked at the hundreds of stone tablets, he realized none of them depicted familiar constellations, which surprised him. "These tablets don't record the positions of the planets?" Atticus asked abruptly. Horn, taken aback by Atticus's observation, replied, "You are correct, Mr. Blaine. These tablets do not record the positions of the planets, but rather words." "Words?" Atticus's eyebrows arched in admiration. "The centaurs use the stars to create unique words? That's remarkable, very creative and imaginative." Atticus did not linger on the star charts, but moved to the opposite side of the room, where a stone wall occupied the entire space next to the third wooden door. Unlike the other stone slabs, this wall did not bear any special inscriptions. In the room, a stone painting with simple lines captured the eye. It depicted a vast and desolate land where countless creatures gathered, not for war, but to prostrate themselves on the earth and worship the sky. Above them, an irregular closed figure filled with chaotic lines seemed to represent the wind, resembling a jellyfish swimming through water. Atticus Blaine stared deeply at the stone painting, his face expressionless, though his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had never expected to encounter such a painting again in another place. "What is this?" he asked calmly, despite the turmoil within. Horn, who seemed to anticipate Atticus's question, was not surprised. He gazed at the patterns on the stone wall with a complex expression. "The wizards have lost the records of that period in history, Mr. Blaine, but the centaurs remember. It was the time when magic first entered our world countless years ago." The Centaur Elder Horn explained in a hoarse voice, meeting Atticus Blaine's inquisitive gaze. End of this chapter. Chapter 643. Saints' magic, it is said, originates from the sky and is not native to this world. Such a startling and seemingly absurd claim, if introduced into the academic circles of the magical community, would undoubtedly provoke widespread denunciation. Magic is as ubiquitous as air, soil, and water. Few delve into its existence or origins. Yet, if someone were to assert that magic is a divine gift, not of this earth, many would find it hard to accept. Horn had anticipated that Atticus Blaine would be so taken aback by this notion that he might vehemently refute it. After all, every great magician possesses a profound understanding of their magical path and is unlikely to accept unverified historical claims. However, Blaine's reaction was far more composed than Horn had expected. He merely responded politely, "Can you elaborate?" Horn paused for a moment, then turned to an astrological stone slab on the side wall. In a voice tinged with the wisdom of ages, he began, "A long time ago, though the exact time is indeterminate, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago, the earth was barren. There were no magical creatures in nature, and human civilization had yet to awaken to wisdom. Then, one day, without warning, a world brimming with magic descended from the starry sky. No one knows why it came here. Perhaps it was merely drifting through the cosmos, accidentally encountering our star, and choosing to linger. This magical world is not visible in the traditional sense. It does not exist in the tangible realm, yet every living being can sense its presence, feel it infusing our world with mysterious power. In the years that followed, this power dramatically transformed our world. The most intelligent humans first learned to harness it, and animals, nourished by it, underwent magical transformations, giving rise to magical creatures across the earth." Horn noticed that Blaine was listening intently, without a hint of skepticism, which pleased him. He continued, "Unfortunately, this world of magic is destined to drift through the starry sky and cannot remain in one place indefinitely. Over time, it began to move away from this once barren land. Its departure was catastrophic for those accustomed to magic. Creatures gradually lost their magical abilities, and only the most gifted retained theirs, though it was only a matter of time before they too would lose them." The age of mythology, ancient era, medieval era, modern times, these epochs flashed through Atticus's mind. As the magical world receded, ordinary people gradually came to dominate the earth, and non-magical civilization began to flourish. "Do you know of the saints, Mr. Blaine?" Horn interrupted his narrative with an unexpected question. "The title saint has many meanings. I assume you refer to the honorific given to those with powerful magic during the Middle Ages and some earlier historical periods?" Atticus replied calmly. "Indeed," Horn nodded slightly. "After the magical world began to distance itself from ours, ordinary people gradually lost the ability to perceive its existence. However, some gifted individuals used the residual magic on Earth to nourish their souls, giving rise to powerful spirits. They established a connection with the magical world through their spiritual power, granting them nearly limitless magical abilities." Horn regarded Atticus Blaine thoughtfully. "At a certain point, the magical world accelerated its departure from ours. Now it is extremely distant, making it nearly impossible to become a saint in this era, Mr. Blaine. The period you are referring to." Atticus Blaine gazed intently at the mural before him. "This depicts the legendary battle where King Arthur and Merlin joined forces to banish Morgan Le Fay," he mused aloud. "That cataclysmic war altered the very fabric of magic on Earth, hastening the separation of the magical realm from our own." Silence hung in the air as Atticus awaited a response. When none came, he turned to Horn, whose expression was one of utter astonishment. "Heh!" Atticus chuckled softly. "You seem surprised." "You know," Horn stammered, "I thought I had read everything in the wizard's magic history. Mr. Blaine, there's no mention of this event. How did you come by this knowledge?" The young Atticus Blaine had indeed taken Horn by surprise. Horn was aware that the centaurs had long protected the druids. Perhaps it was due to his association with clay that Atticus had seen through Miss Cleona's disguise, or maybe he had uncovered some hidden clues. Regardless, he had chosen not to remain in the castle when the war erupted. But how had he learned of this secret history? There were no records of this period in either wizard or muggle history. Yet, Atticus had not revealed anything particularly shocking. He casually inquired, So, after the fall of Avalon Island, was it Merlin who placed you in this forbidden forest? Following that decisive battle, Merlin was the sole surviving wizard. King Arthur perished, and Morgan Le Fay, the Queen of Avalon Island, met the same fate. The dark presence that had lurked within Morgan Le Fay was believed to be the most formidable dark wizard in history, Despicable Herbo. His whereabouts remained unknown, and he was likely still alive. After the war, before Merlin vanished entirely, Atticus's research suggested that Merlin had made certain preparations. He discovered Herbo's lair, the Temple of Azkaban above the North Sea, and relocated it, along with Herbo's double snake staff, to Avalon Island, which had been tainted by death during the conflict. A secret realm was then established to seal off Avalon Island and the temple. The underground world of Nocturne Alley and the Blackstone Tower within it were likely constructed during this period. Rumors in the underground world claimed that Merlin had buried himself in the Blackstone Tower, and opening it would grant extraordinary and holy power. While this was clearly nonsense, Atticus had his own theories about Merlin's intentions, though they were not without their flaws. The old centaur was visibly shaken, almost to the point of fear. Just moments ago, Atticus had been questioning why the centaurs had left Avalon Island and migrated to the Forbidden Forest. Yet, he seemed to know everything, leading the centaur to suspect that Atticus had somehow infiltrated their sacred land. Seeing the old centaur's horrified expression, Atticus shook his head and smiled. He had no intention of explaining how he had come by this knowledge. However, his heart was heavy. From Horn's reaction, Atticus knew his suspicions were correct. After Avalon Island's collapse, Merlin must have found new homes for the magical creatures that once resided there, placing the centaurs in the Forbidden Forest. This was an era before the founding of Hogwarts, before the Big Four. Why had Merlin left a group of centaurs here? Atticus stood before the third door, a sense of anticipation building within him. He had a feeling that the answers to his questions lay beyond it. End of this chapter. Chapter 644, The Fate Tablet. Horn longed to reveal to Atticus Blaine how he possessed such precise knowledge of these top secrets. Yet, under Atticus's earnest gaze, Horn remained silent. Atticus approached the door leading to the third secret room, turned, and looked back at him. Mr. Blaine. Horn understood Atticus's intent. Struggling against the silent pressure in Atticus's calm gaze, Horn spoke with difficulty. This secret room is of great importance to the centaurs. If you allow us to keep its secrets, we would be eternally grateful. Atticus raised an eyebrow in surprise, not expecting such a plea. After a moment of contemplation, he shook his head. Normally, he wouldn't be so insistent on uncovering the centaur's secret room, but the faint yet irresistible allure emanating from behind the door compelled him to proceed. I must see what's inside, Horn, Atticus declared in an unwavering tone, but I promise not to cause any harm within. Horn's withered face trembled, and though he wished to argue further, the resolve in Atticus's eyes made it clear that his plea was in vain. I hope you keep your promise, Horn sighed heavily, stepping forward to open the final door as he had before. As the door swung open, a brilliant light flooded the room, creating the illusion of being swept away in a torrent. Atticus's eyes hardened as he gazed into the final secret room, rendered speechless by the sight. Much like the mysterious chamber beneath Azkaban, this secret room was not a traditional space, but an endless starry sky. The luminous stars traced mysterious paths, converging into a magnificent galaxy. The scene was indescribably awe-inspiring. The mysterious starry sky, Atticus murmured, unable to remain indifferent before the vast universe. He wandered into the secret room, his eyes darting around. In this expansive cosmos, he felt a profound sense of insignificance. The movement of the stars holds all the secrets of this world, Horn said, his voice filled with reverence. Though it wasn't his first time in the secret room, the sight of stars streaking across the sky still captivated him. The great Merlin also received revelations of destiny from the stars. Atticus pursed his lips, remaining silent. His gaze was fixed on a stone platform set against the starry backdrop, supported by a bottomless void. The platform itself was unremarkable, but what truly captivated Atticus was the object it held. He quickly crossed the void to the platform, his eyes locked on the object, a clay tablet, roughly the size of an ordinary magic book. The brown tablet was covered in a network of cracks, resembling sun-dried clay. "What is this?" Atticus asked softly, his voice tinged with curiosity. The seemingly plain clay tablet emitted inexplicable fluctuations that held his gaze. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, he turned to Horn. Horn appeared nervous about the clay tablet. He followed Atticus to the platform, looking at the tablet with reverence. Faced with Atticus's question, Horn hesitated slightly before speaking. "The ancestors of the centaurs followed Merlin to this forest," Horn began. "Merlin left a revelation, instructing us to live here and never leave. Before departing, he entrusted us with this clay tablet, asking us to guard it. Among the elders, it has been passed down by word of mouth as the clay of destiny. For over 1,000 years, we have upheld this mission, even in the most challenging times." "I have never lost it. The tablet of destiny," Atticus Blaine murmured. "Did Merlin ever tell your ancestors why you were tasked with guarding this tablet?" Horn hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. "When I first arrived here, I asked the previous elder of the Dean about this. He told me that over the long years, we have lost some crucial information. We no longer know why Merlin asked us to guard this stone slab." Atticus fell silent, his gaze fixed on the stone slab, which appeared to be nothing more than ordinary yellow clay. A mix of struggle and longing flickered in his pale eyes. Finally, he raised his hand and gently touched the clay tablet with a single finger. Horn's expression changed immediately. Although they no longer understood the purpose of guarding this clay tablet, it was, after all, a relic from Merlin. It had been in the Forbidden Forest for over 1,000 years, and their very existence there was tied to it. In shock, Horn instinctively reached out to pull Atticus away from the edge of the stone platform. But as he attempted to do so, he found himself immobilized by a powerful force, unable to move or even speak. He could only watch in frustration and anger as Atticus's fingertips neared the clay tablet. The moment Atticus's fingertips touched the clay tablet, he felt an intense coldness. This seemingly humble clay tablet was the coldest thing he had ever encountered. The biting chill spread rapidly from his fingertips throughout his entire body, as if even his soul was being frozen. It was not the clay tablet of destiny that changed, but Atticus himself. As the coldness swept through him, and just as he was about to summon a fierce fire to resist it, a silver-white light burst forth from his body, landing atop the stone platform and circling it. The light and shadow formed a peculiar-looking snake, with black and white wings on its back, its entire body enveloped in a white glow that appeared both sacred and sinister. Only then did Atticus realize that his Patronus had manifested in the real world without being summoned. The snake, dancing in the air, suddenly dove into the clay of destiny under the astonished eyes of both Atticus and Horn. A hum resonated as the clay tablet of destiny, silent for millennia, began to vibrate. Its vibrations caused the starry sky chamber that housed it to tremble in unison. Every star within sight moved according to a mysterious trajectory, making the galaxy of stars seem to boil with energy. The chaotic magic broke Atticus's hold over Horn. The old centaur looked around in bewilderment and blurted out, "What is happening?" But what happened next shocked Horn even more. The clay tablet of destiny slowly rose under the influence of an inexplicable power. The tablet, having absorbed the silver snake, hovered in front of Atticus's forehead, as if confirming something. After a few breaths, without warning, the tablet burst into a brilliant starlight, which dissolved into infinite radiance before transforming into a meteor-like brilliance that sank into the center of Atticus Blaine's forehead. Atticus had never experienced the Cruciatus curse, but he was certain that the pain he felt now was beyond anything the curse could inflict. It was as if a red-hot knife was slicing into his soul, the agony indescribable. The intense pain and the sensation of fainting caused Atticus to collapse to the ground. Suddenly, a swirling gray fog appeared before his eyes, something he had never seen before. For several years, Atticus Blaine had been enveloped in a persistent gray fog. After realizing he had entered the world of Harry Potter and possessed an exceptional magical memory, he attempted to use magic to recover his forgotten memories of the plot. Despite trying various methods, he consistently failed, as a gray fog always obstructed his path to the truth. However, amidst the excruciating pain of feeling torn apart, this stubborn gray mist unexpectedly opened a gap. Without warning, a scene unfolded in Atticus's mind. He was floating in boundless nothingness, passing through an enormous door. This door, crafted from a material resembling a clay slab, defied description. Its vastness and majesty, revealed in silence, seemed to embody the universe's most profound mysteries. The figure passing through the door, whose body appeared in an illusory state, was undoubtedly Atticus himself. Yet, he couldn't even confirm his own appearance, and had no recollection of this scene. Overwhelmed by severe pain, Atticus fell into deep self-doubt. In the starry sky there is your way back, a sudden thought echoed in Atticus's mind. As the flowing gray fog said once more, a strange and ancient voice resonated in the secret room of the collapsing starry sky. End of this chapter. Chapter 645, Homecoming. In the vast expanse of the starry sky, there lies your path home. Atticus Blaine, who had fallen to the ground, momentarily forgot the lingering pain in his soul. His eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the galaxy collapse before him. The shock was so profound that it momentarily froze his thoughts. Stop! What does it mean? He wondered, his mind racing. What does it mean that there is your way back in the starry sky? Atticus hadn't felt such fear in years. He was breathing heavily, his mind desperately trying to unravel this mystery. A faint suspicion lingered in his heart, yet he found it hard to accept. Sharing his disbelief was the old centaur, Horn. For over 1,000 years, the centaurs had guarded the secret chamber that held the clay tablet of destiny. Throughout these long years, nothing had ever changed, as if time itself had halted. But now, after Atticus Blaine touched the clay tablet, it vanished, and an ancient voice delivered a revelation. Horn had never heard this voice before, but he instinctively knew to whom it belonged. It was almost a question that required no thought. This is a revelation from the great sage Merlin. Tears welled up in Horn's eyes, and he was so moved that he nearly knelt down. But then, boom, with the disappearance of the Tablet of Destiny, the secret chamber seemed to lose its purpose. The mysterious starry sky around it began to collapse, like an oil painting peeling away. Gray-brown, rough stone walls gradually emerged in the eyes of Atticus and Horn. The shaking continued, the stone walls crumbling, and a torrent of foul-smelling black mud poured into the chamber. Horn knew without a doubt that the chamber was no longer safe, and he had no intention of perishing there. He turned to flee, but as his front hooves stepped out of the starry sky chamber, he hesitated. He glanced back at the weakened Atticus Blaine, who was struggling to rise from the stone platform. A flicker of conflict crossed Horn's cloudy eyes. Without further thought, he rushed back to Atticus's side, bending his front knee. "Quickly, Mr. Blaine, climb on. We must leave here at once." Atticus looked at Horn in surprise, not expecting the centaur to return for him. "Thank you, Horn," he said gratefully, wasting no more words as he mounted Horn's back. Horn carried Atticus swiftly out of the collapsing chamber. The black mud soon engulfed the room entirely, and the collapse threatened the structural integrity of the Centaur Holy Land. The other chambers trembled in response. Horn had no time to lament the fate of the Holy Land. He galloped with Atticus Blaine, finally reaching the temple above ground just as the tremors ceased. When the weakened Atticus dismounted, Horn collapsed beside him, exhausted. The vibrations from the chamber's collapse were still palpable on the surface. Though the shaking had stopped, the earlier disturbance had drawn the attention of the centaurs, and hundreds of torches flickered outside the temple. "Mr. Blaine?" Ferenzi was the first to rush into the temple. He immediately saw Atticus Blaine bent over, gasping for air, and the elder lying breathless on the ground. A terrifying suspicion crossed his mind. "Damn humans!" Blaine charged in, and upon seeing the scene, roared in anger. "How dare you harm Elder Horn?" With that, Blaine raised his arm, ready to hurl a spear at Atticus. "Stop it, Blaine!" Horn gasped, struggling to rise from the ground, shouting to halt the impending attack. Concerned gaze of Horn, the elder centaur. "Mr. Blaine," Horn repeated, his voice steady yet filled with curiosity. "Are you all right?" Atticus Blaine, the renowned wizard, took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Yes, Elder Horn, I am fine," he replied, his voice calm, but his mind racing with thoughts. The revelation of the clay tablet's disappearance and its mysterious integration into his body weighed heavily on him. It was a puzzle he had not anticipated, one that seemed to connect his past life on Earth with his current existence in this magical realm. The centaurs had long guarded the clay tablet, a relic of immense power and mystery. Its sudden disappearance after Atticus's touch was unprecedented, and the implications were vast. Atticus knew that Merlin, the legendary magician, had foreseen many things, but this particular event seemed to be a personal message, a revelation meant solely for him. "Let's discuss this further," Atticus suggested, gesturing towards the underground passage. "I owe it to you and your tribe to help restore what has been disrupted." Horn nodded, his expression softening. "We appreciate your willingness to assist, Mr. Blaine. The centaurs have always respected the wisdom of wizards, and your presence here is no exception." As they moved towards the passage, Atticus couldn't shake the feeling of destiny intertwining with his own journey. The words left by Merlin echoed in his mind. "In the starry sky, there is your way back." It was a cryptic message, yet it filled him with a sense of hope and urgency. Could it mean a return to his previous life on Earth? The thought was both exhilarating and daunting. The mysterious door that had appeared in his mind, resembling the clay tablet, was another enigma. It seemed to hold the key to his past and future, a gateway to answers he desperately sought. Yet, the memories of the Harry Potter world remained elusive, shrouded in a fog that refused to lift. Atticus suspected that his memory had been tampered with, perhaps by the very forces that govern this world. "Mr. Blaine," Horn's voice broke through his thoughts, "we are ready to proceed." Atticus nodded, focusing on the task at hand. He knew that unraveling the mysteries of the clay tablet and his own existence would require time and patience. For now, he would aid the centaurs and honor the trust they had placed in him. As they descended into the depths of the temple, Atticus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead was uncertain, but he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it might lead. The old centaur, Horn, peered intently, his eyes filled with questions about the recent events. Tentatively, he voiced his concerns, his words breaking through the deep contemplation of Atticus Blaine. The renowned young wizard lifted his head, his stern gaze locking onto Horn, silently conveying a chilling intent. This sudden sense of impending doom paralyzed the old centaur with fear. However, Atticus quickly regained his composure after a few moments. He rubbed his brow and sighed softly. "I'm sorry, Horn. I was lost in thought." "Well, that's it." Atticus rose slowly to his feet. Under Horn's terrified gaze, a wand materialized in Atticus Blaine's hand. "You must understand," he began, his voice steady yet firm. "What transpired in the secret room is of great importance to me and must remain confidential. Therefore, end of this chapter." Chapter 646, Kindness. In the dimly lit temple, an ethereal chain of golden flames extended from the tip of Atticus Blaine's staff, swiftly entering the mind of the rigid Horn. In his daze, Horn perceived a distinct clicking sound, reminiscent of a lock being secured. "The stakes are so high that I have to do this," Atticus said, lowering his wand with an apologetic tone. "I have sealed your recent memories. As long as you don't mention them to others, there will be no issues." Atticus didn't specify the consequences of breaking this silence, but Horn could infer that the most likely outcome would be dire. Anger and sadness were futile. After a prolonged silence, Horn nodded slowly, indicating his understanding. "That's good," Atticus sighed with relief, glancing towards the door. The oppressive darkness of the night was intensified by the trees swaying violently in the howling wind, adding an eerie chill to the cold night. "That's good. Now, regarding the centaurs accepting druids into the Forbidden Forest, this is a significant matter. In the long run, it could pose risks to Hogwarts." Horn remained silent, his aged face etched with helplessness. Regardless of Atticus Blaine's decisions, the centaurs had no room to resist. This man was not Albus Dumbledore. He would not be swayed by meetings or discussions. "So I can't be arbitrary. I need to call Dumbledore and hear his opinion. After all, he is the headmaster of Hogwarts." Horn looked at Atticus in surprise, thinking that Atticus had resolved to expel the druids from the Forbidden Forest. A hazy silver light shot from the tip of the staff into the endless night, allowing Atticus to breathe a sigh of relief once more. His Patronus could still be summoned without any hindrance. Although the centaurs, following Horn's orders, had retreated to their rooms, none could truly relax. Atticus noticed the nervous eyes peering through the gaps in the closed rooms. By the way, how did those druids from the secret realm come to the Forbidden Forest? Atticus, standing at the door in the cold wind, suddenly turned and asked, I mean, it's not easy for hundreds of people to enter the Forbidden Forest unnoticed. They used the teleportation array, Horn replied, his voice muffled with displeasure. It's an ancient method of teleportation, similar to a wizard's apparition and portkey. Boom! A brilliant flash of fire dispelled the abyss of darkness. Dumbledore, clad in a purple silk nightgown, emerged from Fawkes's flames. He surveyed the scene with his blue eyes, nodded at Atticus, and smiled at the Centaur elders in the main hall. Good evening, Horn. Oh my, you look much older. How long has it been since we last met? 50 years. Not that long, Professor Dumbledore, Horn replied, his confidence bolstered by Dumbledore's presence. He straightened, tapping the floor with his hoof. Have you forgotten? When that wizard who must not be named was most active, you came to me, hoping the centaurs would join the fight against him. Ah, I remember, Dumbledore said cheerfully. That was a candid exchange. You told me the centaurs would never intervene in the wizarding war. If Voldemort came, you would use your own power to fight him. Fortunately, Harry Potter thwarted Voldemort's plans, and the situation never deteriorated to that point. Horn's mouth twitched, recognizing the teasing in Dumbledore's words. I just happened to be going downstairs for some chocolate milk when I noticed the magical disturbance in the Centaur tribe. I was debating whether to come over and take a look when I received your message. Dumbledore explained, looking around. Atticus Blaine noticed that although he appeared as usual, there was a deep worry in his eyes. What's wrong, Atticus? What happened? That's right, Atticus replied, turning and walking into the temple to meet Dumbledore. There are some developments I believe you should be aware of, Headmaster. Our defense against the dark arts professor, Vidia Cleona, has reached an agreement with our neighbors. The centaurs are searching for something in the Forbidden Forest. This area is home to Greyback's werewolf tribe, and a secret realm has been established there. Miss Cleona considers it the new home for the druid's followers. Despite having weathered countless storms in his life, Dumbledore was taken aback by Atticus's news and remained speechless for over 10 seconds. It's surprising, Horn, Dumbledore said, having processed the multiple layers of meaning behind the situation. I always thought centaurs were unwilling to engage with humans. Do they simply not like communicating with me? This is different, Dumbledore, Horn retorted, casting an angry glance at Atticus. What is your stance, Headmaster Dumbledore? Atticus inquired. Regarding the druids who have moved into the woods, should we wait before expelling them, or should we turn a blind eye? In any case, it seemed inappropriate to immediately drive the druids out of the Forbidden Forest. From a humanitarian perspective, and considering Atticus's own plans, they wanted Cleona to remain at Hogwarts and continue her covert activities. Can you take me to see them? Dumbledore asked, clearly aware of the risks of leaving the druids in the Forbidden Forest. These individuals were placed there by Cleona. Would they align with Voldemort upon his return, causing chaos in the wizarding world, or would they create unnecessary trouble? If you insist, Professor Dumbledore, the centaur said, moving towards the door, I'll ask Firenze to bring the key. We must. No need for such trouble, Atticus interjected, glancing at Fawkes, who was perched on a beam. The clever phoenix spread its wings and took flight. A ball of colorful fire enveloped the group in the temple, and with a clear cry, they vanished. Moments later, Dumbledore, Atticus, and the centaur Elder Horn appeared deep within the forest. After landing, Dumbledore's piercing blue eyes quickly focused on a space beneath a collapsed crossbar. He lifted the hem of his robe, leapt over several vines with agility, and reached the crossbar. Fawkes settled on Dumbledore's shoulder, its ruby-like eyes flashing. Suddenly, it flapped its wings, casting a bright light forward. The radiant light, like an aurora, wove a circular door in midair, revealing the scene within the secret realm. Dumbledore did not cross the threshold into the secret realm. Instead, he stood solemnly outside, observing the world within. He watched the massive oak tree, the treehouse on its horizontal branches, the druids practicing and absorbing life energy from the void, and the children walking and laughing in the fairy tale woods. Neither Atticus nor Horn spoke, waiting for Dumbledore's decision. After about 10 minutes, Dumbledore turned to Atticus with a pleased expression. "I think they're safe." Horn exhaled in relief, while Atticus was not particularly surprised by Dumbledore's reaction. He remained silent for a moment. "You mean, allow them to live in the Forbidden Forest?" "I don't see any harm in it, Atticus," Dumbledore replied thoughtfully. "Look at those children, Atticus." "Oh, I think they might be Hogwarts students one day." End of this chapter. Chapter 647. Something is Wrong with Professor Blaine. The twists and turns of the night concluded here. Ultimately, Dumbledore's shocking words were dismissed as a mere jest by Horn, and even Atticus Blaine didn't take them seriously. Even if there comes a day when we can truly integrate these druids into the magical world, it will certainly be after they have vanquished Voldemort. As they parted, Horn was clearly eager to understand why Dumbledore and Blaine both permitted Cleona to masquerade as Moody at Hogwarts. However, it was impossible for them to reveal the truth to the centaurs at this time. Dumbledore even sternly warned Horn not to disclose that they were already aware of her true identity. "In my opinion, Horn still seems to trust the druids more," Atticus remarked abruptly as they entered the Hogwarts grounds and made their way toward the castle. He had been unusually silent until then. "I wouldn't underestimate the risk of this, Atticus," Dumbledore replied calmly. "But you must learn to trust others. Relying on magic to ensure others keep secrets for you is undoubtedly a very sad thing." In some respects, Atticus was more cautious than Dumbledore himself. Dumbledore anticipated that it would take more effort to persuade Atticus to accept his perspective. To his surprise, Atticus did not argue but nodded silently. "Atticus?" Dumbledore called out suddenly in the dimly lit hall as Atticus silently ascended the stairs. His blue eyes gleamed with a peculiar light, and he smiled. "As I mentioned earlier, you need to learn to trust others. If you ever need assistance from me, whether it's magical or life advice, remember, at least in terms of age, you're not beyond hope." Atticus raised an eyebrow in surprise, then smiled. "Thank you very much, Headmaster Dumbledore, but I'm afraid no one in this world can resolve the confusion I am facing. Even if you could live to the next century." November ended quietly, and December arrived leisurely. More than 10 days had passed, and the atmosphere in the castle had subtly shifted. People were no longer eager to discuss the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, which had been featured in newspapers for over 2 weeks. Instead, they were looking forward to the upcoming Christmas. Tuesday night marked the first time in nearly half a month that stars were visible, prompting Professor Aurora Sinister to issue an urgent notice. She temporarily rescheduled the class, instructing Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students to head to the astronomy tower for stargazing. This notice, however, left Hermione feeling a bit frustrated, as she had planned to spend the evening in the library searching for clues about the strange noise in the golden egg, along with other important tasks. As they climbed the tower, Hermione vented her frustration to Harry and Ron about her disrupted plans. "Oh, come on, Hermione," Ron said nonchalantly. "There are still 3 months until the next task, and there's a Christmas holiday in between. You have plenty of time to figure out what the eerie sound in the golden egg is." Ron glanced at the school bag clutched in Hermione's arms. "What's that jingling in your bag? It can't be those fan letters, right?" Since the end of the competition, the few champions who participated had become the darlings of the European magical community. Each had received countless letters, most expressing admiration, though some contained sharp criticisms of their methods for handling the dragon. Initially, these letters caused Hermione some distress, but after reading more, she became more composed. "Oh no," Hermione said hesitantly, clutching her school bag tightly. Well, I can't use my Christmas time, Ron. I plan to go home for Christmas and won't be able to visit the library to look." "Go home?" Harry asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. He quickly realized he shouldn't have reacted so openly, as it might reveal to Hermione his hope that both she and Ron would stay with him at Hogwarts for the holidays. To Harry's embarrassment, Hermione seemed to pick up on his unspoken wish. She looked at him apologetically, took a deep breath, and said, "Yes, I plan to go home this Christmas. If anything happens to me in the second task, I spent last Christmas with them." Hermione's calm tone was something new. Becoming a champion had changed her significantly. Harry and Ron exchanged uneasy glances, each understanding what the other was thinking. "Don't worry, Harry," Ron broke the silence first. He clearly understood the reason behind Harry's surprise. "I'm planning to stay at Hogwarts for the holidays. Besides, I'm not the only one, and you'll have plenty of time to train me. By the time school starts, maybe I can handle the second task. Oh, avoiding those blast-ended scroots. I really don't know how you managed." "You're making rapid progress, Ron," Harry replied, appreciating Ron's attempt to comfort him. A warm feeling spread through him, grateful once again for Ron's friendship. "I think by the holidays, you can start practicing dodging. The school will be empty, and we can make full use of the gym." Harry, Ron, and Hermione climbed up to the observatory in the astronomy tower. The place was open to the elements, with no walls to shield them from the biting cold wind. The remaining pillars offered little protection. "I'm sorry, Atticus. I have to start class." Professor Sinistra's voice cut through the chill, making the young wizards shiver. Harry wished he could wrap his head in a scarf, much like Quirrell had done during their first year in Defense Against the Dark Arts. As he hunched his shoulders against the cold, he heard Professor Sinistra's voice again, and looked behind a stone pillar in surprise. Hermione, Ron, Neville, and the others turned to see what had caught his attention. Atticus Blaine, who had been bent over an astronomical telescope, suddenly straightened up. He looked back at the students with an apologetic smile. "Oh, sorry, Aurora, I got a little lost." "It's nothing, Atticus," Professor Sinistra replied warmly. "The mysterious starry sky always fascinates people. You weren't so interested in my classes when you were at Hogwarts. Perhaps you've finally realized the importance of astronomy. If you'd like, you can stay and listen. I'm sure these students won't mind." "Thanks, but I have other things to attend to, so maybe next time." Atticus nodded gratefully and quickly made his way down the observatory, leaving many young wizards puzzled. "Perhaps you've noticed," Professor Sinistra said seriously, "even a great wizard like Professor Blaine is captivated by the mysteries of planetary motion. I hope you all can appreciate the magic of astronomy. As I told you in your first class, astronomy is pure magic. It's the most mysterious and impenetrable subject, and only through diligence and dedication can you uncover its secrets." "I remember that old fraud Trelawney saying something similar," Ron remarked with a shrug, drawing strong disapproval from Parvati and Lavender, the two most devoted followers of Professor Trelawney among the Gryffindor students. "But I have to say, this is strange." Hermione frowned, her curiosity piqued. "Perhaps you—" "I hadn't noticed that Professor Blaine has rarely been going down to the auditorium to eat lately. Plus, he didn't seem very attentive in last week's physical education class. That's not like him at all," Hermione remarked, her voice tinged with concern. "Really?" Harry replied, surprised. He thought back carefully, but realized he hadn't noticed anything unusual. Hermione sighed, rolling her eyes slightly, then turned her gaze toward the staircase where Professor Blaine had just disappeared, her expression filled with worry. "Anyway, I hope he gets over his troubles soon," she added softly, her voice trailing off as the chapter came to a close. Chapter 648, Help. Even after returning to his office, Atticus Blaine did nothing but hold a cup of hot tea, leaning against the fireplace wall, staring blankly at the clear yet dim winter night sky. Despite the world's constant changes, the familiar starry sky remained steadfast above. Those twinkling stars held their positions, unchanged for millions of years. It wasn't until the brightest moon crossed to the other side of the castle that Atticus sighed softly, breaking his trance. The tea in his hand had nearly turned cold, and the pine wood in the fireplace had burned out, leaving the office as chilly as the outdoors. He chose not to rekindle the fire. Instead, he returned to his desk, gazing at the photograph of an old man smiling at him, and his thoughts began to wander uncontrollably. In his previous life, Atticus had lived for over 20 years. In this life, he had spent more than 2 decades in the world of magic. To him, this magical world felt more real, while his past life seemed like a distant dream. If given a choice, Atticus would undoubtedly choose to remain in the present. Yet, the path home lingered in his mind. The experiences he had encountered were the most mysterious and unbelievable in the magical realm. How could a great magician like him, standing at the threshold of a new magical journey, resist uncovering the secrets behind it all? As he pondered advancing further, a shadow of sadness crossed his brow. If he progressed, he would reach the level of a saint. According to the centaur elder Horn, after the legendary battle between King Arthur, Merlin, and Morgan Le Fay, and the subsequent acceleration of the magical world away from Earth, no one had reached that mythical level. Atticus didn't fully agree with Horn's assertion. At the very least, the strength of the 4 founding giants of Hogwarts was beyond his current dimension. They had left their mark on the magical world with their formidable spiritual power, but that was a millennium ago. In today's wizarding world, the most powerful figure was undoubtedly Albus Dumbledore. Atticus had initially believed that Dumbledore had reached that legendary stage, but now it seemed otherwise. Dumbledore was indeed stronger than him, yet his power fell short of the rumored saintly level. As for Voldemort and Gellert Grindelwald, who had lingered in Neugamund for over half a century, they were on par with him, albeit on different paths, displaying slight variations in offensive power. In a life-and-death battle, Atticus would not fear either Voldemort or Grindelwald. However, if a wizard as gifted as Dumbledore had never crossed that threshold, what hope did he have? Just as Atticus contemplated his future, the stillness in the office was suddenly disrupted. A house elf appeared before him, the air rippling with its arrival. It was Riga. The little elf seemed to have encountered something dreadful. Panic replaced the usual respect and humility it showed before wizards. It hurriedly threw itself in front of Atticus's desk, tears welling in its tennis ball-sized eyes, stammering, "Mr. Blaine, please, please." Atticus's distracted expression immediately turned serious. Rising from his seat, he asked in a deep voice, "Calm down, Riga. What happened?" "Kind Mr. Blaine, please save Winter," Riga pleaded, its large nose dripping with a string of clear snot. She spoke almost without thinking, but by the end of her plea, she seemed to regain some clarity. "Kitchen, phew, the famous Harry Potter, a school hero, and a red-haired boy. They're in danger, and they asked me to come to you." Professor Sinistra often used Atticus Blaine as an example to inspire students, hoping to ignite their enthusiasm for astronomy. It worked to some extent, but the excitement of the young wizards quickly waned in the biting cold of the observatory. The wind howled like a knife, cutting through the air, and even Hermione found it difficult to concentrate in such harsh conditions. Like everyone else, she was so cold that she wanted to curl up for warmth. The only moment of joy came when Professor Sinistra announced the end of the class. The students hurriedly scribbled down their homework assignments on parchment, noting the positions of the planets, before eagerly rushing out of the observatory. Oh, the Hufflepuff students needed to return to their dormitory in the basement. Ron waved goodbye to Ernie and then playfully swiped at Harry's nose. The unexpected jab made Harry jump. He covered his nose and glared at Ron, bewildered by his antics. "Your snot," Ron shrugged innocently, showing Harry an ice skate. "I was just helping you get it." "Thank you," Harry retorted angrily, "but I could just as easily use a torch to melt it off my nose." Hermione was so amused by the scene that she laughed heartily, even as their Gryffindor classmates passed them by. She clutched her stomach, giggling uncontrollably. "This isn't funny, Hermione," Harry grumbled, his nose stinging as if Ron had torn his upper lip while removing the snot. "Everyone's gone. Let's hurry back to the common room and warm up before Ron decides to take something else from your nose." "Oh," Ron chuckled, but Hermione's laughter faded as she caught Harry's eye. Her expression shifted, and her eyes flickered with determination. "Ahem, you guys go ahead. I have something to do," she said. "You're not going to tell us you're heading to the library now, are you?" Ron asked incredulously, tossing the slightly melted ice skate aside and wiping his hands on Harry's robe. "You'll freeze to death out there." "I already explained why," Hermione insisted, ignoring their advice. She hoisted her heavy school bag onto her shoulders, tucked her frozen hands into her sleeves, and declared, "I'm going home for Christmas break, which means I won't be able to research for a few weeks. Plus, I can't study the strange noise from the golden egg at home because it would scare my parents. I have to make the most of my time now, or I'll fall behind." Before Harry and Ron could respond, Hermione hurried down the steps, following the path her Hufflepuff classmates had taken. Watching her retreating figure, Harry felt an inexplicable sensation in his heart. Just as he pondered what was amiss, a gust of cold wind swept through the corridor, interrupting his thoughts. He shivered, and Ron trembled beside him. "She's absolutely mad," Ron muttered, his voice quivering from the cold. He exchanged a glance with Harry, and the two of them quickly made their way toward Gryffindor Tower, heads bowed against the chill. "Honestly, there's no need for her to work so hard, right? This isn't a final exam where she has to be number one. As long as she figures out the clues before the second task, she'll be fine," Ron continued. "At least she'll have more time to prepare," Harry replied, "especially if they expect her to face something as dangerous as a dragon." Obviously, Hermione has always believed she cheated in the first game. You know, Ron, this thought must have tormented her, so she's eager to prove herself. "That's why I said there was absolutely no need for her to worry," Ron interjected, shaking his head in disapproval as they turned a corner. "If discovering in advance that you're up against a fire dragon is considered cheating, then Cedric, Crumb, and Fleur aren't innocent either. Didn't Professor Moody say that gathering information is part of the game? I'm afraid it's not the fire dragon that concerns Hermione, but Winter." "Wait, Ron," Harry began, intending to explain that Hermione was troubled by the Dom potion, which had subdued the Chinese fireball dragon she was supposed to face. However, as he mentioned Dom, a sudden realization struck him, and he froze in place. "What happened?" Ron asked, puzzled, as he stopped. "Hermione told us she was going to the library, right?" Harry said, frowning deeply. "That's what she said," Ron replied, blinking. "Isn't that what we were discussing?" "But that's not the way to the library. She followed the Hufflepuff students. That path leads down to the foyer on the first floor," Harry stated, bewildered. In the drafty corridor, the two boys exchanged a glance. Then, as if struck by the same thought, they both sprang into action, turning around and sprinting back the way they had come. End of this chapter. Chapter 649, Sneaking into the Kitchen. As the clock neared 10, the castle was unusually quiet. Typically, at this hour, the corridors would be alive with young wizards who relished the thrill of nighttime wanderings, often lingering past the curfew. However, the biting cold seemed to have driven everyone indoors. Hermione, who had been loitering on the second floor, noticed the absence of both students and professors in the foyer below. Tap, tap, tap. Once she was certain the coast was clear, Hermione descended the stairs swiftly. A draught from the cavernous hall made her robe billow like a cloak. Without pausing, she clutched her jingling schoolbag tightly and darted to the left side of the hall, slipping through a door that led to the underground passages. The passage to the Hufflepuff common room was a stark contrast to the one leading to Slytherin. Here, the corridor was warm and inviting, with torches mounted every few steps along the spacious stone walls, casting a bright glow. Hermione paused under one of these torches, waiting until the warmth thawed her stiff hands and feet. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she proceeded cautiously. Boom! A sudden noise behind her made Hermione jump. She spun around, but the brightly lit corridor was empty. After a moment's thought, she concluded that the wind must have slammed the door she had left ajar. Relieved, she exhaled deeply. Encountering a Hufflepuff student here would have been difficult to explain. Hermione had considered using an invisibility cloak for this venture. However, the cloak Hagrid had hastily crafted for her had been left in tatters after a recent game. Borrowing Harry's cloak would mean explaining her intentions to him and Ron, something she wasn't ready to do until her mission was complete. The earlier scare reminded Hermione not to linger. She moved quickly, her eyes scanning the oil paintings lining the corridor. These paintings depicted various foods, some mouth-watering, others peculiar and unappetizing. She didn't pause to examine them closely, her focus on finding a specific image. The big silver bowl of fruit, and then the big green pear. Where are they? She muttered to herself. After walking about 180 feet, Hermione finally spotted her target. Illuminated by two bright torches, an oil painting of a silver bowl brimming with fruit gleamed invitingly. She rushed over, her face breaking into a smile as she examined it closely. Well, Fred said I should. You should scratch this pear with your fingers, a voice suddenly interrupted from behind. Startled, Hermione jumped aside, her eyes wide as she turned to face the speaker. Harry, along with Ron, emerged from under the invisibility cloak, grinning at her. In the corridor, where only the crackling of torches could be heard, the three friends stood in a silent standoff. "You followed me," Hermione exclaimed, her anger flaring. She tossed her school bag into Ron's arms, glaring at him. "I can't believe you dared to do this." "We didn't expect you to lie to us," Ron retorted, rummaging through Hermione's bag. He pulled out a badge engraved with vomiting, holding it up to the torchlight with a smirk. "Oh, going to the illustration library, are we? You need to make up for the Christmas break. You've improved your ability to tell lies, Hermione." Fortunately, Harry was smart enough to realize that the path doesn't lead to the library. Hermione shot a sharp glance at Harry, who was smiling awkwardly, finally understanding how she had been caught. "Now that you're here," Hermione said with a touch of arrogance, "come in with me. I'm going to talk to Regia, Dom's mother. You can help me promote our ideas to the house elves in the kitchen." "That's your philosophy," Harry replied in a plaintive tone, already regretting his decision to follow Hermione. But she paid no attention to their complaints. She grabbed their arms and pulled them along. Then she took a deep breath and reached out her index finger to tickle the green pear on the silver bowl. Red, and George were regular visitors to the kitchen, but Harry, Ron, and Hermione had never ventured there before. Under their nervous gaze, the green pear began to squirm and then transformed into a large green door handle. "Should we put on the cloak of invisibility?" Harry asked nervously as Hermione grasped the door handle. "There might be more than just elves inside. There could be professors." Before Harry could finish, Hermione had already opened the door and dragged the two boys inside without further explanation. The trio stood behind the door, anxiously observing the world beyond it. At a quick glance, Harry saw a high-ceilinged room as large as the great hall above. Gleaming copper pots and pans were piled against the stone walls, and a large brick fireplace stood at the far end of the room. On either side of the fireplace were rows of stoves made from the same bricks. As Harry's eyes moved to the four long tables in the center of the kitchen, an excited scream suddenly erupted from the other end. "Harry Potter!" The sudden cry startled Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Harry saw a small black figure approaching rapidly and instinctively pulled out his wand, which caused the figure to halt abruptly. It skidded to a stop in front of them, leaving a long breaking trail on the floor. "Dobby?" Harry's expression froze as he recognized the little creature. His voice, filled with surprise, drew shocked looks from Hermione and Ron. Ron blinked, staring at the peculiar creature before him. This was the same elf who had blocked the barrier to platform 9 3/4 in their second year, forcing him and Harry to use his father's enchanted car to reach school. It was also the elf who had once belonged to the Malfoy family and had tried to knock Harry off his broomstick during a Quidditch match. "It's Dobby, sir. It's Dobby!" Dobby exclaimed joyfully when Harry called his name. No longer afraid of the wand in Harry's hand, Dobby rushed forward and hugged Harry tightly around the waist. "Dobby has been waiting and waiting to see Harry Potter, sir, and now Harry Potter has come to see him in person, sir." Dobby released his grip, stepped back, and looked at Harry with a beaming smile, his tennis ball-sized green eyes brimming with tears of joy. Ron and Hermione exchanged glances, then turned their attention to Harry. He never imagined he would encounter Dobby in the Hogwarts kitchen, especially after having a brief conversation with Crouch's elf, Winky, on the night of the Quidditch final. Harry had assumed Dobby was still wandering. "But," Harry stammered, still reeling from the shock. Despite the soreness in his ribs from Dobby's enthusiastic embrace, he couldn't wait to ask, "But why are you here?" "Dobby has come to work at Hogwarts, sir," Dobby exclaimed with excitement. "Professor Dumbledore has given Dobby and Winky jobs, sir." "Winky?" Hermione's interest piqued immediately. She vividly remembered the elf who had been unjustly dismissed by Crouch. Winky's painful ordeal had ignited Hermione's passion for advocating the rights of house elves. Hermione lifted her gaze, scanning the room filled with elves who had paused their tasks to regard the trio with admiration. She searched for the familiar Twinkle and Shadow among them. "Where is she?" Dobby, recognizing the young woman standing beside Harry Potter, as one of the Triwizard Tournament champions and a formidable opponent of the Fire Dragon, pointed respectfully to the far end of the kitchen. "She's over there, dear Miss Granger. Dobby can show you if you wish." End of this chapter. Chapter 650. Dobby glanced at Harry once more, and at last Harry's thoughts cleared. He tucked his wand back into his pocket and nodded to Dobby. "Take us to see it, Dobby." Without hesitation, Dobby grasped Harry's hand and led them past the 4 long wooden tables, heading toward the far end of the kitchen. "I finally figured out why all that food just appears when we eat every day," Ron murmured, eyeing the long wooden table that mirrored those in the 4 dining halls above. The kitchen bustled with at least 100 elves. As the trio passed, the elves paused their work, each wearing a tea towel emblazoned with the Hogwarts crest. They smiled, bowed, and curtsied, exuding respect. Yet the simultaneous attention from so many small creatures was somewhat unsettling. The 3 deliberately avoided the elves' gazes. "Are all the school elves here, Dobby?" Harry asked quietly. "Not all, sir," Dobby replied cheerfully. "Many are still busy in the castle, washing the little wizards' and professors' clothes, cleaning the classrooms, boiling water, and tidying the bathrooms. We have endless work, sir." Hermione snorted, displeased by Dobby's cheerful demeanor regarding such labor. Dobby stopped in front of the grand fireplace they had first noticed and gestured. "Look, sir!" "Oh my God!" Hermione gasped, covering her mouth. Tears glistened in her brown eyes, and Harry and Ron widened their eyes at the sight of Winky. Winky sat on a stool by the fire. Unlike Dobby, she wore a neat little skirt and top, with a matching blue hat that had 2 holes for her ears. Despite her tidy attire, her clothes were stained, and part of her skirt was singed. But it wasn't Winky's dirty clothes that caught Hermione and the others' attention. It was the scars on her body. Except for her face, every visible part of Winky's skin bore severe burns. The untreated wounds had healed naturally, leaving her skin distorted and charred, a terrifying sight. "What on earth?" Hermione gasped, her fists trembling against her lips. "What happened to you, Winky?" Unlike Dobby, Winky showed no excitement at seeing her old acquaintance. She dropped the firewood she was about to add to the stove, covered her face, and sobbed loudly, ignoring Harry's question. "I think it's Professor Blaine." Ron, who had grown up in the magical world and considered the plight of house elves normal, spoke with a muffled voice after seeing Winky's burns. That night, she fainted in the top box and couldn't escape Professor Blaine's magic. The Ministry of Magic didn't treat her after interrogating her. "You're right, sir," Dobby said sadly, looking at Winky. "It was a very serious injury. When Dobby visited Winky, she was near death. St. Mungo's wouldn't treat a house elf, so Dobby had to search the forest for herbs for 2 months. Winky couldn't move for a long time." Dobby's voice grew louder. The vitality of house elves is very strong, and Winky finally survived. Then, Dobby took Winky to find work. House elves need work to have food, but where was there enough work for 2 elves? Dobby searched for a long time but couldn't find any. Then one day, Dobby saw many wizards gathering in a venue in Diagon Alley, so Dobby wanted to go in to find something. "Paid 1 galleon a week and gets 1 day off every month," Dobby confirmed, his eyes wide with pride. "Professor Dumbledore is very kind to Dobby and Winky." Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged glances, each processing the significance of Dobby's newfound freedom and employment. Harry felt a surge of happiness for Dobby, remembering the elf's past struggles under the Malfoys' cruel servitude. "That's wonderful, Dobby," Harry said warmly. "You deserve it after everything you've been through." Dobby beamed, his ears twitching with delight. "Thank you, Harry Potter, sir. Dobby is very happy at Hogwarts. Dobby can be free and still serve good wizards." Meanwhile, Winky's sobs had subsided, but she remained on the floor, her expression a mix of sorrow and defiance. Hermione knelt beside her, her voice softy, ning. "Winky, you don't have to go back to Mr. Crouch. You can stay here, where you're safe and appreciated." Winky shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "Winky is a bad elf. Winky must serve her master. Winky is not like Dobby." Hermione sighed, understanding the deep-rooted loyalty that bound Winky to her former master. "I just wish you could see that you deserve better, Winky." Ron, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. "Well, at least Dobby's setting a good example. Maybe one day, more elves will follow his lead." Harry nodded in agreement. Yeah, Dobby's bravery is inspiring. It's a start, right? Dobby, overwhelmed by the support of his friends, nodded vigorously. Dobby will always try to be a good elf, sir. Dobby will work hard and make Professor Dumbledore proud. As the conversation continued, the warmth of friendship and understanding filled the kitchen, a stark contrast to the earlier tension. Atticus Blaine, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, smiled to himself, knowing that change, though slow, was indeed possible. When the topic of payment came up, Dobby's face lit up with joy once more. Dobby still has holidays. Professor Dumbledore is a great wizard. He is willing to give Dobby more holidays and wages, but Dobby bargains with him. Dobby likes freedom, miss, but he doesn't want too much yet. Free, he prefers to work. That's it, Hermione exclaimed excitedly, her eyes shining with realization as Harry and Ron looked on in bewilderment. Dobby, come to me. End of this chapter. Chapter 651, Death. The other elves in the kitchen had initially gathered around, ready to assist at a moment's notice. However, as soon as the conversation turned to topics like salary, vacation, freedom, and resistance, they quickly stepped back, as if the discussion was something distasteful. Hermione decided to set aside the elves' reactions for the moment. She grasped Dobby's thin arm and called out loudly, "Dom, come to me." With a soft pop, another house elf appeared beside Hermione. It was Dom, Hermione's own elf. Dom was still wearing the jumper Hermione had made for him, crafted from fabric torn from her robes. Compared to half a month ago, when the first competition event had ended, Dom had grown noticeably stronger. It was hard to believe that a newborn house elf could grow so much in just 2 or 3 months. "Oh, what's going on, Hermione?" Harry exclaimed as soon as he saw Dom. "What's wrong with its ears?" One of Dom's ears was drooping, its soft fluff completely gone, leaving the skin a burnt black. "It tried to punish itself for helping in the competition," Hermione explained sadly. Dom stuck his head into Hagrid's stove, but thankfully Fang found him in time. Hearing this, even Harry couldn't help but sigh. These house elves were more challenging to deal with than any magical creature he had ever encountered. "Respectfully, Mistress Granger," Dom said, looking around the unfamiliar kitchen. The presence of so many fellow elves made him slightly uneasy. When he realized they were all watching him with curiosity, he called out Hermione's name in panic and instinctively moved closer to her legs. An elf cub! The other house elves could easily distinguish the age of their companions. Although Harry and Ron saw Dobby and Dom as being of similar age, Dobby immediately recognized Dom as a much younger elf, not long out of infancy. Dobby hasn't seen such a small elf cub in a long time. "Miss Granger, is it your house elf?" Dobby asked, both happy and confused as he noticed Hermione still holding Dom's arm. "Dobby, what can I do for you?" Harry and Ron exchanged glances, having already guessed Hermione's intentions. As expected, Hermione held Dom's arm with her other hand and addressed him seriously. "This is Dobby, Dom. Starting tomorrow, you can stay at Hagrid's during the night, but I want you to follow Dobby during the day and learn from him." Dom looked at Dobby, his eyes flashing with confusion at Hermione's directive. "House elves can do a lot of housework without learning, Miss Granger," Dobby said, impressed by Hermione's earnest instructions, but also puzzled. "We are born to do chores, Miss Granger. Your house elf seems to be in good health. What can Dobby teach him?" "Oh, it's just," Hermione hesitated, trying to make her words clearer. "I hope you can teach Dom about pursuing freedom. House elves should also have the right to enjoy wages and holidays while working." The room fell silent. Neither human nor elf made a sound. Dom's skin visibly turned pink, and the light in his large eyes suggested fear rather than understanding. This was a typical reaction, and Dobby, as Hermione had anticipated, looked uncomfortable rather than supportive. "Oh, this is a disaster," Ron sighed, whispering to Harry, who nodded in agreement. Dom glanced at Dobby, instinctively wanting to distance himself, but Hermione's command kept him rooted in place. He could only look at Hermione with pleading eyes and then stare at Dobby in terror. Dobby understood Dom's reaction immediately. "I'm afraid," Dobby began, searching his mind for the right words. Dobby also asked for wages and holidays from Winky and Professor Dumbledore. Winky, who had returned to the fireplace in tears, suddenly became furious. Winky is a house elf who was dismissed, but Winky hasn't stooped to accepting pay yet, she exclaimed in a high-pitched voice. "Winky is ashamed of being free." "You see, miss," Dobby gestured towards Winky, then glanced sadly at the other elves who were keeping their distance. "Besides work, you don't want to discuss anything else with me. With all due respect, miss, your house elf probably won't want to either." "Dom likes to work, great Master Granger, but Dom doesn't want wages and holidays. Dom is an obedient elf." Dom's eyes welled with tears as he looked at Hermione, pleading softly. But Hermione seemed resolute. She suppressed the discomfort in her heart, pursed her lips, and conveyed her determination to Dom and Dobby with her gaze. "Hermione," Harry said, looking a bit helpless. He agreed that the treatment of house elves needed improvement, but he felt her approach was flawed. Just as he was about to suggest a more gradual approach, one of the house elves from the distant group suddenly stood up and timidly approached them, much to their surprise. "You can't do that, Miss Granger." The house elf came to Hermione, trembling with the courage it had mustered to question her. "You are." Identifying house elves was not easy for wizards, and it took Hermione a moment to recognize it. Then she exclaimed in surprise, "Rhaega, I remember, you are Rhaega." Excitedly, Hermione turned to Dom and shouted happily, "Do you remember, Dom? It's your mother, Rhaega. Do you remember her?" To Hermione's disappointment, Dom remained indifferent to Rhaega's presence. He merely nodded at Hermione's inquiry and continued to look at Dobby with fearful eyes, as if Dobby were something unclean. "You must not let Dobby near Dom, Miss Granger." Rhaega's heart was filled with a strange emotion that gave her the courage to voice her objections to Hermione. "Dom is an obedient house elf. Dom is willing to do everything for you, Miss Granger, but you can't let Dobby teach him that house elves can have wages and holidays." Just mentioning these words made Rhaega tremble violently, yet she persisted in finishing her sentence. "Everything that belongs to a house elf belongs to its master." The situation reached an impasse. Dom kept shaking his head slightly, unwilling to approach Dobby. One of Hermione's goals in coming to the kitchen that night was to speak with Dom's mother, Rhaega, who had now stepped forward to help Dom persuade Hermione to reconsider her stance. This left Hermione deeply distressed, her usually sharp mind unable to navigate the complex situation. Lacking the life experience to understand the significance of Rhaega's initiative, Hermione was at a loss. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion in the center of the kitchen, the sound of a house elf teleporting. Everyone turned instinctively to see an elf reappear in the kitchen, landing directly on one of the 4 long tables. Harry, Ron, and Hermione watched the elf, their expressions subtly shifting. Thump! The elf, appearing intoxicated, staggered a few steps before collapsing onto the table. Silence enveloped the room. "What happened to it?" Harry asked, his brow furrowing as he noticed the uneasy glances the nearby elves cast at the fallen elf, sending a shiver down his spine. "It's dead, sir," Dobby gasped, his voice sharp with distress. "Certainly. Please provide the text you would like me to improve." Chapter 652, The Grim Ritual Dead, Harry asked, bewildered. But why? In truth, they could deduce the answer without Dobby's explanation. The house elf lying on the table appeared ancient. Its skin was layered with wrinkles, far more pronounced than those of Sirius's creature. The white fur covering its body was the longest Harry had ever seen on an elf. "Should we?" Hermione began, momentarily forgetting the task she had assigned to Dom and Dobby. Her voice was soft, betraying her unease in the face of this unexpected situation. "Should we call Professor Blaine over?" In her moment of uncertainty, Hermione instinctively thought of Professor Atticus Blaine. After all, she and Professor Blaine had previously saved Regina and Dom together. However, both Harry and Ron were unsure about how to handle the current situation. They hesitated, uncertain about who should take responsibility for the death of the house elf. Then, something unexpected occurred. Rhaega, Dobby, Dom, and even Winky, who had been lost in her own sorrow, stopped crying. They slowly rose and walked towards the deceased elf. The busy elves in the kitchen also paused their work, rushing to the little elf's side. Without any direction, the elves displayed a remarkable sense of order. They gathered around the table, gazing respectfully at the elf whose life had departed. "Oh, they are," Ron whispered in the solemn atmosphere. "They must be paying their respects. It's surprising. I thought they wouldn't care about such things." This clearly shows that Hermione's brown eyes shone with determination. They are no different from us. They feel sorrow for the loss of their companions. Hermione was about to continue when the house elves began to sing. The mournful tunes, reminiscent of funeral songs for wizards, were filled with sorrow. The melodies were ancient and melodious, unlike anything heard in the wizarding world today. The music spread throughout the room. "Is this their tradition?" Ron asked in surprise. "Look, Dobby and Winky can sing, and even Dom can. It's probably as natural to them as working." Hermione shot Ron a look, urging him to be quiet. The scene was truly remarkable. No one in the castle could have imagined that while they slept, a grand house elf funeral was taking place in the Hogwarts kitchen. Harry recalled the time in his second year when nearly headless Nick had invited them to his 500th death day party. It had been a rather unpleasant experience. About 2 minutes later, the mourning song ceased, and the house elves bowed in unison to the deceased elf. "This is the highest honor among house elves, Sir Ma'am," Dobby said softly, breaking the solemn atmosphere. "Only those house elves who have served wizards diligently all their lives receive this honor after death." Dobby looked saddened, his lips moving silently. Harry understood that Dobby was likely feeling sorrow for himself. An elf with wages and holidays like him was considered a disgrace by his peers, not a diligent worker. Hermione frowned at Dobby's words. "What will you do next?" Ron asked cautiously, glancing at Hermione. "You won't bury it in the kitchen, will you?" The thought made Ron shiver. He couldn't imagine that the delicious meals he enjoyed every day might be prepared over a house elf's grave. "Oh no, sir." Dobby shook his head. "House elves don't bury their dead like wizards do. We usually— Oh, here they come." The two house elves nearest to the long table gently lifted their deceased kin. The other elves stepped back in unison, making way for them. Harry and his friends quickly retreated as well, careful not to disrupt the elves' ritual. Under the watchful eyes of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the two elves carried the body towards the large fireplace where they had been conversing earlier. "Oh," Hermione frowned. "If they're going to cremate him, isn't it disrespectful to use a fireplace? They should take him to a proper venue and inform the people in the castle. Professor Dumbledore, Professor Blaine, or Professor McGonagall, they're great, Sue. He headmaster and deputy headmasters of Hogwarts. They should at least be notified." "Ah!" Hermione's words were cut short by a scream of terror. The two boys, Ron and Harry, were so startled by what happened next that they nearly jumped into the fireplace. Harry even drew his wand, pointing it at the elves. The elves' faces turned a shade of blue with anger. Harry had assumed they would burn their dead kin in the fireplace, which seemed disrespectful, akin to burning trash. But unexpectedly, one of the elves burst into laughter and snapped his fingers. A silver light flashed over the body, which glowed red in the firelight. With a thud, the head of the old, lifeless house elf fell to the ground, rolling several times before stopping at Dom's feet. The headless body, as Harry and his friends had feared, was thrown into the fireplace. "What are you doing?" Harry shouted angrily. "Why did you take its head?" He pointed his wand at the elf responsible, ready to demand an explanation. However, Dobby tugged on Harry's robe. "Sir," Dobby gestured for silence and winked at Harry. "This is also a tradition of house elves. Only those who have served wizards diligently and faithfully are granted such an honor after death." Harry's face flushed with embarrassment. The custom seemed absurdly excessive. Meanwhile, Regia and Dom stood together, Dom appearing shocked by the head at his feet. It stared at the head blankly, a strange light in its eyes. Yet, Regia looked at Dom with encouraging eyes. Without any instruction, Dom slowly bent down and picked up the still bleeding head. "What are you doing, Dom?" Hermione exclaimed. "Put that head down. Put it down." To her surprise, Dom resisted her command for the first time. It gazed at the head it held, eyes full of respect. "I'll show you the way," Regia said softly, casting a warning glance at the others around it and gently pushing them away from Dom. "This is also an honor, Miss Granger. It's difficult for a young elf to resist such an honor, Miss Granger." End of this chapter. Chapter 653. Walking around with a bloody dog in hand. Ron swallowed hard, struggling to comprehend the scene before him. Is this supposed to be an honor? Merlin's beard? What's wrong with you? His voice echoed the unspoken thoughts of Harry and Hermione, especially Hermione. The recent events had shaken her understanding of house elves, making her realize that despite her efforts, she still knew so little about them. She understood now, more than ever, the challenges in changing their ways. "I'd like to see." Harry's eyebrows were furrowed in anger, his voice tense as he gripped his wand and moved forward. Under the watchful eyes of many house elves, Rika led Dom to a secluded corner of the kitchen. There stood an old stove, long unused, its surface dark and covered in cobwebs. For a house elf, the stove's size and location were perfect. Rika stepped inside effortlessly, and Dom followed, carefully ducking her head. "What does it mean?" Ron asked, bewildered, glancing at Hermione. "Do they cut off their dead peers' heads just to burn them separately?" "You misunderstand, sir. Its head will not be burned but preserved forever," Dobby explained to Ron, his voice high-pitched with excitement and a deep-seated longing. "Preserved permanently?" Harry echoed, exchanging a meaningful look with Hermione. "I want to go in and have a look," Hermione declared firmly, her determination unsurprising to Ron and Harry. "I knew it," Ron muttered under his breath, eyeing the stove, which was barely larger than a dog hole. Hermione was already on the move, shedding her wizard robe, rolling up her sleeves, and following Dom inside. Harry, without hesitation, cast a Lumos spell to light his wand, placed it in his mouth, and climbed into the stove. "There won't be any danger inside, right?" Ron asked Dobby hesitantly. But before Dobby could respond, Ron sighed, "Forget it," and followed Harry. The other elves, except for Dobby, did not follow. They lingered at the cave entrance for a moment before dispersing to resume their duties. For them, the death of a fellow elf was a closed chapter. Their priority remained serving the wizards in the castle. The kitchen was bustling late at night, as busy as during the day, if not more so. House elves needed rest, but to support the castle's wizards, they couldn't all sleep at once, leading to a natural shift system. About half of the elves rested between midnight and 3:30 a.m., while the others slept from 3:30 to 7 a.m. The kitchen stoves never ceased their flames, and with reduced manpower, each elf managed multiple stoves to ensure a hearty breakfast for the castle's inhabitants. When the frantic Rika appeared in the kitchen with Atticus Blaine, the orderly elves descended into chaos. They hurriedly woke their sleeping companions from the 4 long tables, all rushing to Atticus. "Is there anything I can do for you, dear Professor Blaine?" many elves asked, but Atticus, looking grave, gestured for them to step aside. "Mr. Blaine, over here," Regina called, swiftly crossing the 4 long tables, with Atticus striding behind her. Soon they reached the stove where Harry, Ron, and Hermione had ventured. "Explain what happened as simply and clearly as possible, Rika," Atticus instructed in a deep voice. "Just moments ago, in his office, as soon as—" Upon hearing that the 3 young ones were in danger, Atticus Blaine immediately instructed Ruija to take him to the scene of the incident, not even pausing to inquire about the details. As Ruija recounted the events in a panicked voice, Atticus knelt down, squinting to examine the stove. It was clear that this stove was no ordinary one. The opening was far larger than usual, leading into a space that had been magically expanded multiple times. Even before Ruija finished her narration, Atticus had already studied the stove carefully. He stood up, brandishing his wand, with a series of complex and swift movements. The dark space around the stove's mouth began to distort, as if an invisible hand were stirring calm waters. As the distortion intensified, the stove's opening expanded rapidly, inflating like a balloon until it was large enough for an adult to pass through. "Let's talk as we walk," Atticus said, stepping into the black void first. He moved quickly, his body seeming to shrink with each step due to the highly compressed space. The corridor was dark and seemingly endless, clearly manipulated by magic. Such a long corridor would be impossible to find even if one traversed all of Hogwarts. The cold air pressed in on Atticus, making him shiver despite his considerable magical prowess. It felt as though he had entered a freezer. As he surveyed his surroundings, he understood why Ruija hadn't simply apparated them there. The Hogwarts grounds had a strong magical resistance, making apparition impossible, and this corridor amplified that effect. Hidden in the void, it was powerfully connected to the environment. The ancient magic not only prevented wizards from disapparating, but also blocked house elves' teleportation methods. Atticus even doubted that Fawkes' abilities would work here. "Let's move," Atticus said, casting a glowing orb into the air. He glanced at Ruija, who was following closely, and led the way forward. To be honest, Atticus had never encountered such a terrifying place within Hogwarts. The stone walls of the corridor were a deep black, and at regular intervals, wooden frames were nailed to them. Each frame held the head of a house elf, some of which had been there for centuries. Despite the low temperature preserving them, the heads had shriveled, nearly mummified. Dark brown stains marked the stone walls beneath each frame, remnants of blood that had once dripped down when the heads were freshly placed. The rancid smell in the air reminded Atticus of the underground world of Nocturne Alley. The corridor seemed endless, and each head bore a humble smile. Atticus looked at them for a moment before turning away with a slight sigh, feeling a pang of sympathy not only for the unfortunate house elves, but also for Harry, Hermione, and Ron. It was easy to imagine how frightened the three must have been upon encountering such a sight. As young wizards, the sensible choice would have been to retreat quickly, yet these three stubbornly sought to uncover the truth. Since graduating, Atticus had explored many ruins, including grim sites filled with corpses and blood. Yet the scene before him evoked a feeling of dread unlike any he had experienced, even more unsettling than the small tunnel he had once seen beneath Azkaban, a path lined with elves' palms as steps and heads as handrails. As Atticus Blaine ventured deeper into the hidden cave by the sea, reminiscent of the Lake of Inferi created by Voldemort, he left behind the eerie sight of severed heads and continued onward. The sound of dripping echoed in the corridor, marking the passage of time. 20 minutes later, Atticus found himself in the very depths of the passageway. On the stone wall to his right, the head of an elf continued to bleed, the crimson droplets pooling on the ground below. The wooden frame beside it stood empty, a silent testament to the grim scene. "Just ahead, Mr. Blaine," Ruija whispered, her voice tinged with suppressed excitement. They pressed on, their pace quickening. As they advanced, the corridor grew colder, the air no longer stagnant but alive with a chilling breeze. The further they went, the more intense the cold wind became, until it whipped through the corridor with such force that it sent Atticus's gray hair into a wild dance atop his head. Finally, after half an hour of navigating the corridor, their path was blocked by a stone wall that seemed to be carved from ice, its surface glowing with a faint blue light. The journey had led them here, to this mysterious barrier. End of this chapter. Chapter 654, The Strange Room. Ugh! After a series of groans mixed with pain, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the house elves, Dobby and Dom, lying beside them, gradually regained consciousness. The abrupt spatial shift had left their bodies and minds in disarray, but the unfamiliar room they found themselves in demanded their immediate attention. "Where are we?" Harry murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, as he took in the surroundings with wide-eyed astonishment. The room was as large as a classroom, its decor dominated by shades of yellow and black. The furnishings suggested a blend of office and living space. Ron blinked in surprise, turning towards the window where soft sunlight streamed in, casting a warm glow on the floor. After spending most of the day in a cold corridor, the warmth was a welcome relief. "Look at the weather outside, Harry," Ron exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I can't imagine how long we've been unconscious." "Perhaps a professor found us after we fainted and brought us here temporarily," Hermione speculated, though doubt lingered in her voice. Her reasoning faltered. If a professor had indeed rescued them, they would have been taken to Madame Pomfrey, not left on the floor of an office. Even Professor Snape wouldn't have been so careless. Harry, however, seemed oblivious to the flaws in Hermione's theory. He surveyed the room, noting its ordinary appearance, yet something felt off. "Maybe Professor Sprout," he suggested, spinning around to take in more of the room. "The kitchen we stumbled into is near the Hufflepuff common room. Maybe she found us and brought us to her office. Hermione, have you ever been to her office?" Judging by the sunlight, they had been unconscious for at least 12 hours. Such a significant event would surely have reached the ears of Professor Dumbledore, Professor Blaine, and Professor McGonagall. It seemed unlikely they would be left in Professor Sprout's office. "No, Hermione replied, her voice edged with panic. She noticed the eerie silence of the room, as if the usual castle noises were completely absent. "No, Harry Potter," Dobby interjected, his eyes wide with confusion. "Dobby has cleaned Professor Sprout's office before. This is not it. Dobby has never seen this room. It is not the office of any professor in the castle." Dobby's revelation sent a shock through Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The room was clean and clearly in use, yet Dobby, a house elf familiar with the castle, had never encountered it. Who, then, could it belong to? A chill crept into their hearts. "Whoever it is, we need to get out of here," Ron urged, panic rising in his voice. "We've probably missed at least 2 classes. If we're lucky, Professor McGonagall might let us out of detention before Christmas." Realizing the gravity of their situation, the trio rushed to the office door. Harry reached it first, his hand gripping the cool brass handle. He twisted it with determination, but as the door refused to budge, a cold dread settled over him. "Open it." Atticus Blaine, who had been observing the scene from a distance, stepped forward with a calm demeanor. His presence seemed to bring a sense of relief to the trio. "Let me take a look," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. Hermione, still puzzled by the peculiar collection of books, stepped aside to allow Atticus access to the shelf. "Be careful," she warned, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and concern. Atticus examined the bookshelf with a discerning eye, his fingers lightly tracing the spines of the books. "These aren't ordinary books," he mused, his tone thoughtful. "They seem to be enchanted, perhaps to protect something or to conceal their true nature." Harry, still rubbing his sore head from the earlier collision, asked, "But why would someone enchant a bookshelf with recipes and a fake history book?" Atticus pondered for a moment before responding, "It's possible that these books are a decoy, meant to distract or mislead anyone who stumbles upon them. The real secrets might be hidden elsewhere in this room." Ron, still recovering from the shock of touching the book, nodded in agreement. "That makes sense. But how do we find out what's really going on here?" Atticus smiled slightly, a glint of determination in his eyes. "We need to think like the person who set this up. Look for anything out of place or any clues that might lead us to the truth." With renewed focus, the group began to search the room more thoroughly. Hermione, ever the scholar, scrutinized the titles and arrangement of the books, while Harry and Ron examined the walls and furniture for hidden compartments or secret passages. As they worked, Atticus kept a watchful eye on their progress, offering guidance and encouragement. His presence was a steadying force, and the trio felt more confident with him by their side. After a few minutes of searching, Hermione's keen eyes spotted something unusual. "Look here," she called out, pointing to a small, inconspicuous lever hidden behind a decorative vase. "This might be what we're looking for." Atticus approached and examined the lever closely. "Good find, Hermione," he praised. "Let's see what happens when we pull it." With a collective breath of anticipation, Atticus pulled the lever. A soft click echoed through the room, and a section of the wall slowly slid open, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. The group exchanged excited glances, their earlier frustrations forgotten. "This is it," Harry said, his voice filled with awe. "We've found the secret." As they stepped into the hidden chamber, Atticus led the way, his confidence unwavering. Together, they ventured into the unknown, ready to uncover the mysteries that lay ahead. "Touch this book," Ron urged, pointing to the bookshelf when he saw that neither Harry nor Hermione understood his suggestion. "You can try it yourself." "That's not polite, Ron," Hermione hesitated, her voice tinged with caution. "We shouldn't." "Oh!" Ignoring Hermione's protests, Ron grabbed her wrist and guided her hand to touch the books on the shelf. Harry followed suit, completing the experiment. The 3 young wizards exchanged puzzled glances and fell into a contemplative silence. The books, including A History of Hogwarts, appeared to be neatly arranged on the shelves. However, when their fingers brushed against them, it felt as though they were touching posters affixed to the wall. The books wouldn't budge from their places. The trio turned their attention back to the seemingly ordinary room, a shiver running down their spines. Meanwhile, Dobby, who had been exploring the room, hopped onto the desk in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. His large eyes widened with confusion as he examined a sheet of paper spread out like a newspaper in the corner of the desk. Royal Order of Wizards, sir, Dobby said, looking up at Harry with a puzzled expression. Do you know what this is? End of this chapter. Chapter 655, Convergence. Recently, a horrifying incident has been widely circulated in the wizarding world. The law enforcement team of the Holy See Tribunal publicly executed 3 children with wizarding talents by burning them at the stake in Keled. In response, the Royal Society of Wizards parliamentary group dispatched an investigation team to Keled to conduct an on-the-spot investigation and negotiate with the Holy See to uncover the truth. Reports suggest that the 3 children were actually out-of-control obscurials, causing chaos in Keled at the time of the incident, resulting in the deaths of dozens of Muggles. Upon learning of the situation, Vatican law enforcement officers quickly intervened, containing the threat. At the strong request of the surviving Muggles, the 3 obscurials were executed at the stake. Following the report, several hand-drawn images depicted cities engulfed in flames and explosions. These illustrations lacked the animation typical of the Daily Prophet's moving photos. Beneath the images, more content was obscured by a book titled How to Make a Good Pot of Soup. Ron reached out to open the book, but much like his previous attempts to retrieve a book from the shelf, something was amiss. Just like Hogwarts, a history of the school, he couldn't lift it at all. What kind of trick is this? Ron exclaimed in frustration, desperately trying to pick up the cookbook. No matter the angle, the book remained stubbornly adhered to the table, as if it were a thin sticker. Harry's attempts to extract the newspaper-like notice also proved futile. This is probably some kind of defensive magic, Hermione speculated, frowning as she watched Harry and Ron struggle with the table. It's likely meant to prevent unauthorized intruders from tampering with things in this office. Oh, really? Ron panted, brushing his sweaty bangs aside. This is a perfect spot. Harry ceased his efforts and turned to Hermione. The Obscurus. What is that, Hermione? The Obscurus is a wizard, Harry, Hermione explained effortlessly. Some wizards who have suffered severe psychological trauma lose control of their magical power, which then manifests as a powerful dark force within them. However, it's very unstable and uncontrollable, often causing harm to themselves or others. The 3 of them, along with the 2 house elves, fell silent. The golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a hazy and surreal glow over the office. The Holy See, is that the Muggle religion? Ron asked, frowning in distaste. Why didn't they imprison these 3 obscurials in Azkaban? Burning them at the stake is barbaric. And what is the Royal Society of Wizards? Has it been reported in the Daily Prophet? Harry continued to seek answers from Hermione, knowing she was one of the few students at Hogwarts who regularly read the Daily Prophet. And Keled, he added, trying to recall the name of the city. The Dursleys' habit of watching the weather forecast after dinner had familiarized him with British city names, but he couldn't place Keled. Is this a special name wizards use for Muggle cities? He asked. This time, Hermione's vast knowledge failed her, and she couldn't answer any of Harry and Ron's questions. The fear of the unknown loomed over them. Despite the quiet and peaceful office, a closer inspection revealed an unsettling irrationality and strangeness in everything around them. As the group gradually realized that this office might not belong to any Hogwarts professor, a sense of unease began to grow. Let's get out of here first, Harry suggested, feeling the fear in their hearts intensify with each passing second. In the silence that followed, Harry had a sudden idea. He stopped examining the desk for clues about the room's owner and instead focused on the task at hand. Following Hermione and Ron, he dashed toward the wall where a massive floor-to-ceiling oil painting hung. We fell through this painting, Harry said seriously, studying it intently. It was the only landscape among the R.'s decorative paintings, rendered in warm tones of black and yellow. The painting depicted an open valley, with a gentle breeze rustling through golden wheat fields. Birds hovered low under a vast blue sky, and a ridge road divided the fields, stretching from the bottom of the frame into the distance. Are you suggesting this painting is the real door, Harry? Hermione asked, pressing her face close to the canvas to scrutinize every detail. Despite her keen eyesight and extensive knowledge, she couldn't detect anything unusual about it. Let me try something, Hermione said, raising her vine wand and pointing it at the painting. Under the eager eyes of Harry, Ron, Dobby, and Dom, she muttered an incantation. The tip of her wand emitted a series of cursed lights, but as they touched the painting, they vanished without a trace, like mud sinking into the sea. This lack of reaction only confirmed their suspicion that the painting held a hidden secret. "Maybe we should try another approach," Harry suggested after a moment's thought. He gently pulled Hermione back and aimed his wand at the painting. "What are you planning, Harry?" Hermione asked, puzzled. "Let's take a page from Seamus's book," Harry replied, flexing his wrists and shrugging. "When traditional methods fail, sometimes an explosion can yield unexpected results." "Wait, Harry!" Hermione exclaimed, alarmed, but Harry, trained and quick, had already acted. He cast a silent, disarming curse, sending a red light shooting toward the painting. It struck the canvas and vanished instantly. To their surprise, the painting reacted. It rippled like the sea under a moonlit night, the wheat swaying wildly as if caught in a fierce wind. In the distance, a shadow appeared on the ridge road, growing larger and more distinct. Sensing danger, Dom quickly pulled Hermione away from the painting, shielding her with his body. Dobby tackled Harry to the ground, while Ron stood frozen, staring in bewilderment at the painting's transformation. The waves within the painting grew more intense until suddenly it burst into light. Amidst Harry's shout, Ron stumbled backward, using his hands to brace himself as he retreated in fear. The shadow in the painting became clearer, and then, boom! Atticus Blaine leaped out of the painting, landing gracefully on the floor. He surveyed the three young wizards and two elves sprawled before him, raising an eyebrow with a mysterious smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Did you enjoy yourselves?" he asked, his voice tinged with amusement. "Professor Blaine?" The three young wizards gaped at the unexpected arrival, their mouths wide enough to fit two eggs. Silence, surprise, and embarrassment filled the room as they processed the sudden turn of events. The wizards, having endured a complex mental ordeal, slowly rose from the ground and lined up in front of Professor Blaine. Despite their frightened expressions and anticipation of a reprimand, the three young wizards felt a genuine sense of relief. "I'm glad to see you're alive, you three," Atticus Blaine said in a relaxed tone. "Otherwise, as the director of the Student Safety Office, I'd have to submit my resignation to the school board." "This is all my fault, Professor," Hermione exclaimed, her lips pursed and her face pale, her voice tinged with tears. "I insisted on coming in for a look. Harry and Ron were just worried about my safety." Harry and Ron, aware that they had landed themselves in trouble once again, were determined not to let Hermione shoulder the blame alone. They were eager to speak up, but before they could utter a word, Professor Blaine intervened. "Don't be so quick to take the blame upon yourselves, the three of you," Atticus said, casting a glance around. His initial relaxed demeanor vanished, replaced by a serious expression as his brows furrowed. "I'm afraid the trouble we've encountered has only just begun." End of this chapter. Chapter 656. Recognized Names. "You've already explored this room, haven't you?" Atticus Blaine squinted his eyes, carefully surveying everything within his field of vision. He didn't rush to explore further, but instead asked softly. The three young wizards immediately began recounting their experiences. They described everything from the moment they regained consciousness on the floor in front of the painting to Harry's recent attempt to cast a spell on it. They detailed their efforts to retrieve books from the shelf, open the door, and even mentioned Dobby's presence on the desk. They left nothing out, no matter how trivial. As Atticus listened, Harry noticed that his professor's expression remained calm. However, when the Royal Wizarding Association was mentioned, Atticus's demeanor subtly shifted. "Do you know what the Royal Society of Wizards is?" Harry asked earnestly. "And this office. We thought it was Professor Sprout's office, but Dobby said it didn't belong to any professor." Atticus remained silent. After hearing their account, he quickly moved to the desk, eager to see the newspaper for himself. Observing the silent Professor Blaine, Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged glances, realizing that this room might be more mysterious than they had imagined. They had never seen Professor Blaine exhibit such solemnity. "Are we in serious trouble, Professor?" Since Atticus's arrival, the three young wizards and two elves had found a sense of security. They followed him closely. Seeing Professor Blaine's seriousness as he read the newspaper, Hermione, despite her fear, anxiously asked, "Are we going to be expelled, Professor Blaine?" "I have no plans for that yet, Miss Granger," Atticus replied, teasing the young witch, though his face remained unsmiling. The news of 3 young wizards from the Royal Wizarding Association being sent to the stake by the Vatican tightened Atticus's lips. He raised his head, scanning the unique office once more, and a theory began to form in his mind. The office's owner seemed to have a keen interest in cooking. Most of the books on the desk were related to culinary arts. Before leaving, the owner was likely designing new recipes, as evidenced by the parchment filled with food ingredients and cooking techniques that Atticus and the 3 young wizards had noticed. Atticus's eyes swept over the top of the pile of parchment. Among the ancient English words, 2 words suddenly caught his attention, causing his pupils to tremble and his breathing to quicken. He leaned over the table, staring intently at the carelessly scrawled words. Professor Blaine's intense reaction naturally startled Harry, Ron, and Hermione. They all saw the hand-drawn recipe on the top of the parchment pile, which appeared to be for chocolate and raspberry ice cream, a common dessert at Hogwarts. Every wizard there had tasted it countless times, and it seemed neither surprising nor shocking. Hermione, quick to think, noticed 2 unfamiliar words in the direction of Professor Blaine's gaze and guessed they were the source of his shock. "Is this Chinese writing, Professor Blaine?" she asked, puzzled. Although she hadn't specifically studied Chinese, she had encountered Chinese students in her Muggle school and recognized the beautiful, square characters they wrote. Chinese writing? Were there any Chinese students at Hogwarts? Harry racked his brain, but the only face that came to mind was Cho Chang's. "It turns out to be here," Atticus finally said after a long silence, shaking his head with a laugh. Harry and the others were puzzled, but Professor Blaine had no intention of clarifying his cryptic words. He turned to them with a contemplative expression. "You're right, Hermione. This is Chinese writing," Atticus Blaine said. "It's pronounced Jonan." "Jonan?" Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the 2 elves, who had become almost invisible in their insignificance, repeated the name silently several times. At Hogwarts, every faculty member is a knowledgeable wizard, so it wasn't surprising that they could read and write some Chinese characters. After all, that mysterious eastern country boasts a long history and a thriving magical civilization. It's only natural for professors to know some Chinese to study the magic theories from that region. But what does this pronunciation signify? Hermione voiced this question, and Professor Blaine responded with a perplexing and intricate smile. "It's a person's name, Hermione. Whose name could it be? Was it a wizard of great renown, or perhaps a chef with extraordinary culinary skills?" Before Hermione could delve further, Professor Blaine's demeanor shifted to one of gravity. He addressed them in a tone reserved for imparting crucial lessons in their physical education class. "I need you 3 to remember this. Yes, you must remember Harry, Hermione, and Ron." Professor Blaine leaned in slightly, his serious expression unsettling them. "If you ever find yourselves in a situation where you need to prove your identity to me, say this name. Tell me that I personally gave it to you. Say nothing more, just this name. Do you understand?" There was so much to comprehend, and for a moment Hermione was at a loss for words. Yet, under Professor Blaine's intense gaze, she nodded and asked in a trembling voice, "You mean this name is a password we use to prove our identity to you, right, Professor Blaine?" "Exactly, Hermione," Atticus nodded approvingly. "This is crucial. Forgetting it could lead to unpredictable and serious consequences." "Jonan?" Though still bewildered, Hermione grasped the gravity of the situation from Professor Blaine's stern instructions. She committed the pronunciation to memory, vowing to recite it silently several times before bed each night. Harry and Ron, standing beside her, wore equally solemn expressions, silently repeating the name with determination. Atticus Blaine turned his attention back to the papers on his desk, searching for any valuable information. He didn't seem in a hurry to leave. However, Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged glances, their eyes conveying a silent debate. Finally, Harry gathered the courage to speak up. "Professor Blaine?" "Yes," Atticus replied, his attention momentarily diverted as he attempted to open his desk drawer. Is there a way for us to get out of here? Harry asked hesitantly. Don't worry, Atticus reassured them with a calm smile. When the time is right, we'll leave on our own. For now, we must wait for the room's owner to return. Wait for the owner to return? Suddenly, a sharp click echoed in the room. The sound of mechanical springs, though faint, was as jarring as thunder to Harry and his friends. They whipped their heads toward the door, watching as the handle slowly turned. Was the room's mysterious owner finally arriving? Whose peculiar office was this, and why was it connected to the eerie corridor hidden in the kitchen? Whatever you see next, Atticus said, stepping away from the desk and gently nudging Harry and the others aside. Remember to stay calm. I'm sorry, it seems like there might be a misunderstanding. The text you've provided appears to be incomplete or missing context. Could you please provide more of the text or clarify what you would like me to improve? This will help me assist you more effectively. Chapter 657, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. Remember to stay calm, Professor Blaine had advised them. But why the emphasis on calmness? Could it be that Professor Blaine knew whose room this was? Even if it were Professor Dumbledore's new office, such solemnity seemed unnecessary. Of course, for Harry, if this office belonged to Snape, that would indeed be terrifying enough. Finally, the brass door handle turned completely, and with a creaking sound, the tightly closed door slowly opened. A short figure entered the office with graceful steps and then closed the door behind it. A house elf? The newcomer was not a faculty member from the castle, but a house elf. Hermione glanced at Professor Blaine and noticed that he, too, seemed a bit surprised. Harry quickly observed something unusual about this house elf. First, its clothing. Although the style was quite retro, it was well coordinated, unlike Dobby's odd mix-and-match attire. It aligned perfectly with the wizarding aesthetic. Moreover, the clothes were impeccably clean, not a hint of sloppiness. Second, its demeanor. The elves Harry had encountered were typically subservient, their expressions a mix of fear and deference when facing wizards. Even Dobby wasn't entirely free from this. But this elf was different. It seemed to be in high spirits, standing tall as it walked towards the desk, smiling and humming an unfamiliar tune. It carefully cradled a finely carved golden cup in its hands, exuding elegance. Professor Blaine, it seems? Harry and Ron were focused on the elf, but Hermione had noticed something crucial. The elf moved directly to the desk, ignoring them entirely, as if they were invisible. This was a bizarre notion. Hermione instinctively looked at Professor Blaine, who was staring intently at the golden cup in the elf's hand. There was something peculiar about this little elf, both inside and out. As it passed by, Ron, startled, stumbled back a few steps, but the elf paid no attention, maintaining its cheerful demeanor. It placed the golden cup, filled with a purple liquid, on the table and inspected it. Then, it moved to the windowsill, checking the dust with its fingers. "It can't see us, can it?" Ron asked, looking at Professor Blaine. "Is this something you did to prevent us from being discovered?" Professor Blaine didn't respond to Ron's question. Instead, he leaned down to examine the golden cup on the table's corner. "Dobby knows every elf in the castle, Harry Potter," Dobby whispered to Harry, "but Dobby has never seen this one." Harry was about to reply when his expression turned to horror, mirrored by Ron and Hermione. The mysterious elf continued humming, and after ensuring the room's cleanliness, it returned to the desk, passing directly through Professor Blaine, who was still studying the golden cup. It began tidying the slightly disordered desktop, picking up books and papers that seemed unreachable to them. "It's a ghost," Harry exclaimed. The sight of the elf passing through Professor Blaine's body was so startling. He couldn't fathom any explanation other than a ghost. Could it be that? Ron's face was as pale as snow, his breath shallow and his fingertips trembling. Does this office mean that we have broken into? In the world of ghosts, we can't touch anything in the room, and this elf can't touch us either? Ever since they entered the office, a strange feeling had been gnawing at Harry and the others, and Ron's speculation only deepened their fear. Even Hermione, usually the voice of reason, was visibly shaken. It felt as though every ordinary object around them exuded an eerie aura. Instinctively, the three of them moved closer to Professor Blaine, the only person in the office who could offer them a sense of security. Atticus Blaine straightened up and exhaled deeply. When he had destroyed the exquisite locket once owned by Slytherin, Dumbledore had shown him a book that recorded the Hufflepuff Golden Cup. The Golden Cup depicted in the book had runes at its base, similar to those on Gryffindor's sword, Slytherin's locket, and Ravenclaw's diadem. However, the cup before him now lacked these markings. Atticus did not doubt that the gold cup in front of him was genuine. He simply noted that, at this point in time, the four founders had not yet imbued their respective legacies with such symbols, which almost represented their identities. This is not a world of the undead, and the elf before us is not an undead either, Atticus said softly, his thoughts drifting away from the golden cup. We are under the influence of illusion magic in this room. This office is showing us an event from the past. Professor Blaine's explanation allowed the three young wizards to breathe a sigh of relief. Illusion magic sounded far safer than accidentally entering the realm of the undead. Professor Blaine, Hermione said, her voice tinged with regret. She felt responsible for leading the group, including Dobby and Dom, into the illusion magic, inadvertently causing trouble for Professor Blaine. Do you have a way to break the illusion magic in the room? You can try, Atticus replied. Magic that has lingered for thousands of years is not without flaws. He gazed into the void, his lavender eyes flickering with insight, as if he could see through the illusion. But I think we shouldn't try too hard. The original owners of this office clearly wanted to show us something valuable, and leaving now would waste our adventure. Adventure? Ron pursed his lips. He didn't consider stumbling into this peculiar office an adventure. However, seeing Professor Blaine's calm demeanor, he had no choice but to quell his unease and remain quiet. Once Hermione was assured that they were not in immediate danger, her curiosity began to stir again. Who was the owner of this office? She couldn't help but ponder this question, and the house elf with the bright eyes, busy tidying the desk, piqued her interest even more. This elf exuded an aura of freedom, unlike the elves in the kitchen and elsewhere who seemed to relish their servitude. How did this elf manage to do all this? Hermione observed the elf intently, trying to uncover the secret behind its natural yet peculiar behavior for a house elf. But then, click! The office door handle turned unexpectedly. A woman entered. This middle-aged woman was slightly plump, but her gentle demeanor had a soothing effect. Her wine-red eyes shone like stars, outshining even Professor Dumbledore's penetrating blue eyes and Professor Blaine's magical lavender gaze. She was not alone. A younger witch, who appeared weary, followed closely behind her. The moment they laid eyes on the young witch, both Harry and Ron's expressions became noticeably unsettled. Until now, the most captivating women Harry had encountered were the Veela he saw at the Quidditch World Cup finals. However, compared to the appearance and demeanor of the young witch before him, Harry thought those Veela seemed almost ordinary. Yet, as he furrowed his brows, he couldn't shake the feeling that the two witches who had just entered were somehow familiar. "Who are they?" Ron whispered to Hermione. Professor Blaine's earlier comments hinted that the office they were in likely belonged to a former, well-known Hogwarts staff member. Like Harry, Ron felt a strange sense of recognition and turned to Hermione for answers. At that moment, Ron's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Beside him, Hermione's brown eyes were wide with astonishment, her mouth agape in a comical yet telling expression of shock. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Ron asked, his voice tinged with anxiety. But he didn't need Hermione to respond, as the ensuing conversation clarified the source of her surprise and apprehension, leaving him equally bewildered. "Good afternoon, Cheeky," the middle-aged witch, who entered first, greeted warmly, her voice as gentle as a spring breeze. "I've been looking for you, Cheeky. I've come up with a few new dishes and plan to add them to the children's daily menu. But before that, perhaps you could offer some advice." "Good afternoon, Miss Hufflepuff, Miss Rave." "Enclaw," replied the house elf known as Cheeky, standing respectfully beside the chair. With a slight bow, he said politely, "It would be my pleasure to serve you, Miss Hufflepuff. It would be my pleasure." End of this chapter. Chapter 658, Great Love. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stared in disbelief at the plump, middle-aged witch who had just returned to her desk. Opposite her, another witch conjured a stool with her wand and sat down, her beautiful, dreamy ice blue boots catching the light. The trio looked as if they had seen a ghost. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. Hermione's steps faltered as she instinctively retreated. She recognized the identities of these two witches almost immediately. Even after thousands of years, the portraits of these legendary figures were familiar to her. Yet, she couldn't fathom how such an impossible event could occur. Harry's mind was in turmoil. He had been at Hogwarts for over 3 years and had never heard of Helga Hufflepuff and Rowena Ravenclaw appearing in person. It seemed utterly absurd. After all, Hufflepuff House and Ravenclaw House were integral parts of their daily lives at the castle. But now, 2 of the 4 founding giants of Hogwarts stood before him, alive. Harry's thoughts nearly froze. He mused that even if Voldemort suddenly appeared, he might not be as shocked. "I must be dreaming," Ron murmured, shaking his head slightly. His eyes inadvertently met Professor Blaine's calm expression, and he was startled to find that Professor Blaine remained composed. No one could stay calm in such a situation unless— "Aren't they right, Professor Blaine?" Ron blurted out. In his shock, Hermione quickly covered Ron's mouth and pulled him back. "Shut up, Ron," Hermione whispered sternly, glaring at Harry, who was staring at her blankly. "That's Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. Be respectful." Professor Blaine explained it as illusion magic. Hermione had deduced that this office belonged to Helga Hufflepuff. Although she didn't understand why Miss Hufflepuff had left such a marvelous enchantment, it allowed them to glimpse these legendary witches. What a remarkable experience it was. Hermione gazed at the 2 witches with excitement and admiration, grateful for her insistence on exploring the mysterious secret corridor in the kitchen. Turning to the 3 young students and 2 house elves who had unconsciously retreated to the wall, Atticus Blaine smiled. "They are, Ron. You must realize this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so I ask you to remain silent from now on, no matter what you hear." "You look tired," Lady Ravenclaw spoke the house elf named Kiki, standing beside Hufflepuff. The group from the past held their breath, watching intently. "Would you like me to make you a refreshing drink?" Kiki asked, a proud smile on her face. "It's the latest formula developed by Miss Hufflepuff. It's very effective and delicious." Atticus Blaine regarded Kiki with a curious expression. This house elf was extraordinary, seemingly unaffected by the servility that had been imposed on their kind. Dobby and Dom looked at Kiki in disbelief, unable to imagine their ancestor speaking in such an equal tone to the legendary witches Helga Hufflepuff and Rowena Ravenclaw. "I'm happy to try Helga's new creation, Kiki," Ravenclaw replied, her icy eyes gleaming with a light that seemed almost detached from emotion, adding a chill to her smile that even the sun couldn't melt. "Please wait a moment, Miss Ravenclaw. Making this new drink will take some time. I'm not particularly skilled," Kiki said, as Helga and Rowena watched her with interest. Chi-Chi took extraordinary steps and vanished from everyone's sight. Recalling the scene he had witnessed in the underground temple on the island, Ravenclaw fell silent for a moment. Then, with emotion in her voice, she turned to her like-minded friends. "It's amazing, Helga, that you could help Chi-Chi overcome her innate instinct to surrender." "Every intelligent creature has a soul that yearns for freedom, Rowena," Helga replied, her gaze tenderly fixed on the door Chi-Chi had closed behind her. "Magic cannot completely extinguish that desire. As long as you use love to wipe away the dust on their souls, they can bloom again." "Love?" The corners of Atticus Blaine's mouth twitched. The belie, that love can conquer all, was reminiscent of one of Dumbledore's famous assertions, yet he remained skeptical that pure love could truly overcome everything. Hermione, too, noticed Chiki's extraordinary nature. Among the group, she was the most intrigued by this topic. She took a moment to glance at Dom, pondering how Chiki's existence seemed intertwined with the words of the great Helga Hufflepuff. She felt greatly encouraged. "Love," Rowena repeated softly, a hint of sadness in her ice-blue eyes which drew Atticus's attention. This was unusual. The Rowena Ravenclaw he had encountered in Azkaban was the most rational witch he had ever known, her emotions nearly erased by her unparalleled wisdom. What could have caused such a profound emotional shift in her? Helga, aware of Rowena's sadness, let the smile fade from her lips. She sighed gently. "Aren't you going to tell Godric?" Ravenclaw's smile was tinged with sorrow, her beauty only amplifying the heartbreak in her expression. You and I both know, Helga, how controversial Hogwarts is in the wizarding world. The Royal Wizards Association and those ancient families tolerate its existence only because they fear the power of the four of us. Rowena's voice was heavy with melancholy, but they have never ceased their efforts to destroy the school and seize its magic for themselves. The radicals among them are willing to wage war to obliterate Hogwarts at any cost, while the conservatives temporarily tolerate its existence, hoping that once we are gone, if Hogwarts lacks a worthy successor, they will act. We've managed to keep them at bay by maintaining opposition between our families. If the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw families were to grow closer, it would undoubtedly provoke their already tense nerves, potentially sparking a war. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. Harry and the others listened in stunned silence, especially Hermione, who furrowed her brows, desperately trying to recall any historical records of the two being lovers. Yet she found none. Atticus pursed his lips slightly, not particularly surprised by this revelation. During his journey to Azkaban, he had already sensed the implicit feelings between the two. Nonetheless, a sense of admiration welled up within him. The magical world 1,000 years ago was far harsher and more closed than it would be a millennium later. According to Ravenclaw, she seemed intent on distancing herself from Gryffindor's emotions to prevent war and ensure that Hogwarts, a haven for young wizards, especially those with Muggle blood, could continue to exist. Godric won't care about this, Helga said solemnly. That's what worries me, Rowena replied, her sad smile revealing a glimpse of beautiful emotions. Godric would fight for what he believes in, but that goes against the path. We have always adhered to our principles. Once the war begins, we may find safety, but the descendants of those families at the school will be summoned back, leaving the Muggle-born wizards vulnerable to targeted attacks. The persecution will intensify, and Hogwarts will cease to exist. I cannot allow this to happen in the name of love. Rowena's breath quickened momentarily, and her expression softened, shedding some of the formidable aura she usually carried. This made her appear more human and even greater in her resolve. To destroy Hogwarts and the future of those gifted children who have the chance to receive an education for countless years to come, all in the name of love, is something I cannot condone. End of this chapter. Chapter 659, The Future. You know it's going to get out of hand sooner or later, Rowena, Helga said, her voice gentle yet firm. Like a caring sister, she left her seat, walked around the desk, and stood beside Rowena Ravenclaw. She gently stroked Rowena's hair, which cascaded down to her belly. There was a look of pity in her eyes. Your child. You know Godric's temperament, Rowena. You can't hide it from him. Once he learns that your love has borne fruit, he will eagerly announce it to the magical world. The child of Rowena Ravenclaw and Godric Gryffindor? Ron gasped in surprise. I've never heard of that. History records that Miss Ravenclaw had a daughter named Helena Ravenclaw, but there is no historical record about Helena's father, Hermione said, her voice trembling with excitement. They were unraveling a mystery of history. Rowena lowered her head, gazing at her belly. The maternal glow on her beautiful face almost overshadowed the calm aura of her wisdom. I plan to let this child remain within me for a few more days to dispel Godric's suspicions, she said softly. After that, I intend to create a fictional Muggle father for this child. Why? Hermione exclaimed, despite having been warned in advance. Even Harry and Ron frowned. The idea that Ravenclaw and Gryffindor had a child, yet Ravenclaw was unwilling to tell Gryffindor, seemed unfair to Gryffindor himself. The three young Gryffindors felt a sense of injustice and anger on behalf of their ancestor. Ms. Ravenclaw has already given her explanation, hasn't she? Atticus Blaine interjected calmly, not wanting to rebuke Harry and the others. Perhaps you don't know that the Royal Society of Wizards was the predecessor of the Ministry of Magic. Thousands of years ago, it almost entirely represented the interests of pure-blood wizard families. These families controlled the channels of magical inheritance. In their eyes, Hogwarts' existence was undoubtedly an eyesore. Miss Ravenclaw's fictitious Muggle father for her child would reassure the Royal Society of Wizards and the Muggle royal family, which held extraordinary status at that time. Back then, Muggle blood was synonymous with impurity. By publicizing that she was married to a Muggle and had offspring, Miss Ravenclaw was employing a very effective method of self-defamation in the wizarding world. She sacrificed her reputation and tarnished the noble bloodline of the Ravenclaw family. But Miss Ravenclaw just said that if Hogwarts does not have a good successor, then war. Hermione's voice faltered, her face pale. As a witch with dirty blood, the implications were deeply personal. "It's true," Atticus Blaine said, turning to Hermione with a warm smile that quickly melted her icy expression. "The notion that Muggle blood is less noble than pure blood is a fallacy. In today's magical world, if a descendant of a pure-blood family dares to mention the word mudblood in front of Professor Blaine, they would face severe consequences. Professor Blaine is a champion for almost all Muggle-born wizards. But if the Royal Society of Wizards and the Muggle royal family believe that there is a strong possibility of an excellent successor to Hogwarts, then war would be almost inevitable. Don't doubt the likelihood of this happening. The wizarding world at that time was fraught with much sharper contradictions than today," Atticus explained. "They don't have to be afraid of anyone, do they?" Harry asked, still upset. 3 of the 4 founders of Hogwarts were the greatest wizards of their time. It's impossible for anyone to stand against Gryffindor. Even if Slytherin were to be held back, he wouldn't be far behind. Even if there were a war, they wouldn't lose to the Royal Society. Atticus glanced at Harry, a hint of helplessness in his eyes. What the 4 founders valued most was the survival of. Hogwarts was not just about their own safety, Harry. Moreover, the pure-blood families in the Royal Wizarding Association of the past and those in the wizarding world today claim to have a long history. These families are not the same as they once were. Although they may not match the legacy of the 4 founders, their power should not be underestimated. Ron hesitated, feeling a bit embarrassed by the topic. He wasn't sure if the Weasley family existed when Hogwarts was founded, and if they did, which side his ancestors would have supported. Helga Hufflepuff was not surprised by Rowena Ravenclaw's shocking words. She looked at her friend with a sad expression, imagining the criticism and ridicule Rowena would face once she announced to the wizarding world that she had married a Muggle and had children. Rowena would undoubtedly become the laughingstock of Europe. Helga couldn't offer comfort. From the day the 4 founders decided to build a school for all gifted children in the old Slytherin family castle, such pain and suffering were inevitable. The office, thousands of years ago, was filled with a solemn and somber atmosphere. Atticus Blaine, who had stepped aside out of respect for the 2 legendary witches, noticed something unusual. He quickly approached the office chair, bent down, and stared into Helga Hufflepuff's eyes. He observed that her eyes, once wine-red, had transformed into a silvery white, resembling a flowing river within her own gaze. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. They didn't understand what Professor Blaine was doing, but they didn't dare to interfere. Like him, they were captivated by Hufflepuff, one of the 4 founding giants of the Wizarding School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. In silence, Helga Hufflepuff, whose gentle temperament exuded a mysterious aura, appeared as if her hair was being gently tousled by a breeze. "Don't do that, Helga. There's no point." Rowena, immersed in her maternal instincts, suddenly came to her senses. She placed a hand on Helga's shoulder, smiled, and shook her head. "You know better than I do that the future is like a river full of forks. In the rushing river, which path a drop of water will take is ever-changing. I don't want to peek into this child's fate. Let him shape his own future. Besides, you've already spent too much energy preventing that evil wizard from returning to our world." Helga's eyes returned to their wine-red hue. She remained silent for a moment, then nodded, gently stroking Rowena's hair with affection. The office door opened again, and the elf named Kiki entered, carrying a steaming cup. "Best while it's hot, Lady Ravenclaw," Kiki said, handing the cup to Rowena. She glanced at the untouched golden cup on the table, belonging to Hufflepuff, and wrinkled her nose in dissatisfaction. "Oh, I'm sorry, Kiki," Miss Hufflepuff apologized. "Rowena and I were discussing something important." With a snap of her fingers, Kiki made the drink in the golden cup steam once more. She tilted her head, looking at Hufflepuff expectantly. The 2 legendary witches couldn't resist Kiki's eager gaze, so they returned to their seats, sipping their hot drinks. If you need anything else, please feel free to ask, Kiki said with a bright smile, collecting their empty cups. She knew they had important matters to discuss, so she quietly left the office, humming a cheerful tune. Thanks to the elf, the previously somber atmosphere lightened considerably. The heavy atmosphere in the office gradually lightened as the two founders engaged in conversation about the recent teachings of students at the castle. They mentioned several students' names, none of which were familiar to Atticus Blaine and Harry. Regarding those dreadful creatures you and Godric discovered on that island in the North Sea, Rowena, do you have any ideas on how to restrain them? Helga's tone shifted from casual to serious after the small talk. Atticus's expression turned grave. He realized that the forthcoming discussion was the very reason Helga had preserved this memory. End of this chapter. Chapter 660, Constraints. The conversation between Helga Hufflepuff and Rowena Ravenclaw was captivating for the three Harrys from future generations. If scholars thousands of years later were to discover the secret relationship between these two founders of Hogwarts, it would undoubtedly cause a significant uproar. However, for Rowena and Helga, it was merely a friendly chat. When the topic shifted to the North Sea Islands and the terrifying creatures inhabiting them, Helga and Rowena's expressions grew serious. The aura of power surrounding the two witches reminded Harry and his companions of the legendary status of these founders. But what exactly was this about? Hermione had a suspicion and glanced at Professor Atticus Blaine. Unfortunately, Professor Blaine did not offer any explanations this time. He listened intently, his expression solemn. Rowena Ravenclaw remained silent. Under everyone's watchful eyes, a wand appeared in her hand. She left her seat and moved to the open space in the office. With a graceful flick of her wand, a silver-white bird emerged from its tip, hovering beneath the low ceiling. "That's a Patronus!" Harry exclaimed. The Patronus charm was a spell he had learned from Remus the previous year to protect himself from Dementors. It was the most advanced magic he had mastered. "It's exactly like the one on the Ravenclaw house emblem," Ron said, puffing out his cheeks in surprise. Ms. Ravenclaw had summoned her Patronus. The light in Hermione's brown eyes intensified, confirming her suspicion that the North Sea island Miss Hufflepuff mentioned was Azkaban, and the terrifying creatures were Dementors. As Ravenclaw's wand settled, the majestic eagle hovering in the air suddenly paused. It raised its head and let out a sharp cry, and a shadow wrapped in white light shot from the bird's beak. The shadow quickly expanded, transforming into a terrifying, death-like creature cloaked in black. Just looking at it sent chills down their spines. Clang! Harry's expression changed. He retreated hastily, his back slamming into the wall. Ignoring the pain, he quickly reached for his wand, gasping as he aimed it at the Dementor. "Don't be nervous, mate. It's fake!" Ron quickly reassured Harry, holding his wrist. Harry stared at the Patronus, surrounded by a milky white screen of light emanating from Ms. Ravenclaw's Patronus. Despite its attempts to escape, the barrier remained unyielding. Harry was stunned, then his face relaxed. Creatures like Dementors had a profound impact on him. During the adventure when he and Hermione rescued Sirius from the Forbidden Forest last year, they were discovered by dozens of Dementors sent by the Ministry of Magic. At that moment, both Sirius and Hermione fell unconscious, leaving him alone to face the terrifying Dementors. Harry was certain those were the most desperate 2 minutes of his life. He glanced nervously at Professor Blaine, relieved to see that the professor did not seem displeased by his hasty reaction. Harry took a deep breath, calming his racing heart, and continued to listen. "Have you tried to destroy it, Rowena?" Miss Hufflepuff asked, joining Ravenclaw's side. Despite having seen the Dementors before, Miss Hufflepuff's expression remained solemn, with a hint of anger in her voice. "Many attempts have been made," Miss Ravenclaw replied, her voice as clear as an icy spring, consistent with the results of our previous. In discussions about these ghost-like creatures, they exist in a realm between life and death, both illusory and real. They are closely tied to the rules of magic, rendering general spells ineffective against them. I have conducted numerous experiments, including the use of ancient magic, and found that the most effective spell to inhibit them is the Patronus charm. This was an expected result. Miss Hufflepuff did not appear surprised and simply murmured, "So, The only way is the one we discussed before. Miss Ravenclaw nodded slightly, but Atticus Blaine furrowed his brow. During a visit to Azkaban, while following the memories of Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, the two founders had discussed this topic. They had insisted that the Dementors must be destroyed, a notion Atticus had questioned at the time. These Dementors are formed from the empty shells left by wizards who have split their souls multiple times to create Horcruxes. To complete themselves, these empty shells absorb all the beautiful emotions of living creatures, feeding on them to create more of their kind. No creature with an independent soul would favor Dementors, yet Atticus never understood why the four founders of Hogwarts were so intent on their destruction. Was it simply because the creatures were evil? The truth seemed more complex. In previous memories, Gryffindor and Ravenclaw mentioned that Miss Hufflepuff had received certain revelations. She likely foresaw the potential return of Helbo to the world. If this were to occur, the disaster could be catastrophic. Some of the arrangements between Merlin and the founders were specifically designed to prevent this, suggesting a necessary connection between destroying the Dementors and stopping Helbo. Atticus's mind raced, but there remained a thin barrier between him and the truth that he could not penetrate. "We can only leave this important matter to time," Ravenclaw said calmly. "But controlling the number and behavior of these creatures is also crucial. I once considered placing a seal based on soul power around the island, but it would be futile. After we die, our soul power will dissipate, and they will lose their restraint, eventually leaving the island in search of more emotions." "What's your solution, Rowena?" Atticus inquired. Ravenclaw raised her wand again, and during the complex spellcasting that even Atticus had never witnessed, her ice-blue eyes glowed, and her silhouette emitted a sky-blue light. In the dim illumination, an ethereal piece of paper wrapped in green light gradually appeared. Suddenly, dozens of chains filled with green light emerged from the paper, instantly encircling the Dementors. The rattling chains resembled venomous snakes, fixating on the Dementors. The already agitated Dementor showed fear in the face of these chains. It floated within the confined space of the light screen, its cloak concealing mouthparts that exuded a putrid stench, spewing streams of cold air in a futile attempt to resist the chain's encroachment. "What is that?" Hermione couldn't contain her curiosity and looked at Professor Blaine. She thought her question would go unanswered, but after a few moments, Professor Blaine hesitantly replied, "I'm not certain. This creation by Ms. Ravenclaw seems to possess powerful restriction magic and vitality. Could it be a contract?" "Stop, Rowena." Suddenly Hufflepuff, who had noticed something alarming, looked both frightened and concerned. She addressed Rowena Ravenclaw in an unusually stern voice. "There is a unique connection between the individuals of this species and the group, making it pointless to destroy them individually. However, we can exploit this connection, as long as the individuals are restrained." Ravenclaw, unfazed by Helga's harsh words, paused her actions. She dismissed the paper and chains with a wave of her hand, then turned to Helga Hufflepuff, who appeared worried. With a reassuring smile, she said, "That's a good idea, isn't it?" End of this chapter.